Good morning, it's 7 o'clock. The Prime Minister heads to the NATO summit this morning after announcing the biggest change in Britain's nuclear posture since the end of the Cold War.
Plus, Sir Keir Starmer faces down a growing mutiny at home over disability benefit cuts.
It's Wednesday, the 25th of June. Your headlines. Britain is to buy 12 fighter jets from the US capable of carrying nuclear warheads. We'll speak to the Defence Secretary in the next few minutes. Donald Trump rejects leaked intelligence that says US strikes failed to destroy Iranian nuclear sites.
NATO leaders will be meeting here in The Hague for a summit that once again will be dominated by one man, Donald Trump.
More than 120 Labour MPs vow to sink Keir Starmer's welfare bill, but could he be rescued by the Conservatives? And Arise Sir Gareth, the former England manager, will be knighted today. Very good morning to you. The Prime Minister has announced that the UK will spend more than £1 billion on a squadron of new jets capable of carrying nuclear warheads. It's the biggest change in the country's nuclear posture since the end of the Cold War. All of this taking place at the NATO summit in The Hague. And we've got some live arrivals for you taking place, including the Sec-Gen, Mark Rutte. Let's have a listen in.
Given our long-term threat of Russia, but also the massive build-up of the military in China and the fact that North Korea, China, Iran are supporting the war effort in Ukraine. It's really important that we spend more, so that will be number one on the agenda today, a new plan when it comes to spending over the coming years. Of course, defence industrial production. We know that we are lacking a defence industrial base which is producing sufficiently. So we have fantastic companies, but they have to put in the extra production lines, they have to put in the extra shifts in making sure that we produce the ammunition and all the items we need. And Ukraine. We will big at the summit today. Will be discussed making sure that Ukraine over the coming years will continue to count on the support of NATO countries to keep them in the fight, but also make sure that we can bring Ukraine to a durable and lasting peace. So a transformational summit, looking forward to it. And of course, hope to see you later today. I can now take a few questions, and then at the end, we will see each other at the press conference. And I see that CNBC wants to start.
Thank you very much.
Sir.
Steve Sedgwick, CNBC, as you know, sir. Look, there's a lot of questions about Spain. There's a lot of questions about nations that do not feel they have the money in their budget to get to 2%, let alone 3.5%, let alone 5% in total as well. Do you fear that Spain could scupper this meeting and actually, sir, despite all your huge diplomatic efforts, incur the ire, the wrath of the United States?
No, I don't. I'm not worried about that. Of course, these are difficult decisions. Let's be honest. I mean, politicians have to make choices in scarcity. And this is not easy because 7, 8 countries at the start of this year not at 2%. They will now reach the 2% this year. Many of those countries said we will do it somewhere in the 2030s. They've now committed to do it this year. And already we added in an aggregate of $1 trillion since 2016, since Trump 45 started his first presidency. But today, and this is the third stage, we will add trillions extra with this new plan. But of course, you're right. The countries have to find the money. It's not easy. These are political decisions. I totally recognize that. But at the same time, there is absolute conviction with my colleagues at the table that given the threat from the Russians, given the international security situation, there is no alternative. We've got to do this, really.
Mr. Rutte, why won't Mr. Trump back Article 5?
For me, there is absolute clarity that the United States is totally committed to NATO, totally committed to Article 5. And yes, there is also an expectation, which will be fulfilled today, that the Canadians and the Europeans will speed up their spending, making sure that we not only are able to defend ourselves against the Russians and others, but also to equalize. And this is fair, that we spend the same as the US is spending. Sir, yes. The big thing about Article 5 and the good thing about Article 5 is that it is clear that we defend each other when we are attacked. But you will always get all these questions, yes, but if this cyber attack or this hybrid attack, we never go into those details.
General, you had dinner with Donald Trump yesterday. In what mood was he? And
excellent mood, and the King and Queen were hosting a fantastic dinner in this. And I was so proud to sit in that Orange Hall, which is basically exemplar. I'm a historian, so this is about the history of the Dutch Republic. 1648, the Münster peace deal, and the king made a fantastic speech. You have seen it, I hope. I was also able to say a few words, so I think it was a great dinner.
Nederland dit allemaal gaan betalen? 5%, meneer Rutte.
Nederland is op 2 of 3 na het rijkste land van de wereld. Als wij het al niet kunnen betalen, wat kunnen we dan van de anderen? Wij zijn schatrijk. Dankzij verstandig beleid over de laatste jaren.
Gaat het pijn doen, meneer Rutte? Staat de NAVO er onder Trump beter voor dan onder Biden?
Ik denk dat de NAVO na vandaag er sterker voor staat dan ooit sinds de val van de Berlijnse muur.
Meneer Rutte, heeft u nog meer persoonlijke berichtjes samen met Trump gestuurd de afgelopen nacht die misschien niet openbaar worden?
Oh, spannend. We gaan het kijken. Maar ik heb er geen bezwaar tegen.
Maar heeft u er wel internationaal ook kritiek op gekregen?
Nee.
Want als je toch een beetje schaamteloos zei, maar de Europese landen die hebben die NAVO die mooi dankzij gehaald.
Ja, is toch waar?
We're going to continue to monitor this. By the way, Deborah is there, and we'll go back to him when he talks English. We'll go back to Deborah live for a summary when it finishes, but we can't turn the camera to Deborah until he does finish. Serena's here on set with me. Serena, I mean, a big headline from me there is, he says there's absolute clarity that the US is committed to NATO, committed to Article 5. Great to hear that from the Secretary-General. I guess he said it with confidence, but maybe not every single person has that same level of confidence as he does.
Yeah, I think all of the questions involved the word Donald Trump in that press conference, so I think he is the big figure. Mark Rutte in a very good mood, though, and saying that Trump was in a very good mood, a fantastic mood last night. I mean, Trump is historically a NATO sceptic. And obviously from his ceasefire debacle, he goes into this NATO conference not having the victory lap that he potentially wants. So we'll see what his mood is. But I think also the other big headline from that is the spending. He says European spending will be increased. We know that Keir Starmer has indicated that 5% of GDP would happen by 2035. So that is in line with what we were expecting.
Yes.
How can the Allies stop worrying when Trump keeps relativizing Article 5 again and again?
I would think, look what the United States is doing, what Donald Trump is doing. They are spending almost $1 trillion on defense. They are by far the biggest contributor to NATO. They are delivering all the key enablers for NATO, also here in Europe. I mean, they are an important ally. They are by far the biggest ally in NATO. They are over 50% of the total NATO economy. But what we now will do over the coming years is to bring down, step by step, shift the burden away from the United States, more towards the Europeans and the Canadians, which I think is fair. And in the meantime, we will also equalize the spending. I think we now have to go because colleagues of mine, leaders of and presidents. I'm not a leader or a president. I'm only a Secretary General, but still former colleagues of mine will enter this building and want to speak to you. But I thought the children were here. They are there. Yes, please. You ask the last question. Am I excited? I'm excited, but to a level where I can still control it. Thank you.
Mark Rutte there wrapping up his press conference or opening statements for his arrival. Deborah has been there for us and listening in. Deborah, if you can hear us and able to join us now, I mean, a lot of the questions there Serena and I were just discussing was about America's commitment to Article 5 and to NATO as a whole. His framing of it was that there's no question to be answered on.
Yeah, well, his key job here is to keep a steady ship and to avoid any drama. But when Donald Trump is in the room, there's nothing predictable about the summit. These events are usually very, very carefully choreographed with decisions agreed long before the actual meeting takes place. But when Donald Trump was first president, it upended the steady ship of NATO in terms of the predictability of these meetings. He came in and, forcefully demanded demanded allies spend more, warning that the US may do the unthinkable and actually leave the alliance. And since it became clear that Donald Trump was coming back to the White House, allies across NATO have been doing all that they can to try to woo him, to convince him of the importance of this transatlantic club that is fundamental to European security. But the NATO allies want Donald Trump to appreciate that it's also important for American security. And so you can imagine there are a huge amount of efforts going on to do that. And actually, Mark Rutte, he was asked in that press conference just then about the text message that he sent to Donald Trump, where he used gushing language to praise the American president for his leadership in rallying allies to agree to a new target of 5% for spending on defence and national resilience. Donald Trump then posted that message on his Truth Social media site, and the NATO Secretary General there was asked if he was embarrassed and was obviously playing it down, but it can't have been comfortable for that language to be out in the open. But again, it really underlines the huge efforts that are underway here to try to keep Donald Trump engaged, keep him committed, and fundamentally get him to say out loud that he will defend all NATO allies if any of them were attacked. And that fundamental Article 5 principle was undermined yet again yesterday when Donald Trump appeared to question that his definition is different to other people's.
Deborah, it's so fascinating hearing all that. We're obviously waiting for all of the individual countries' arrivals, and we're looking forward to hearing what they've got to say and your questioning of them. Ahead of us speaking to the Defence Secretary, which we'll be doing shortly, just outline for us why it's more complicated, potentially more controversial than it would appear on the surface that we're buying these 12 F-35A planes.
Yeah, it's a huge move, a huge decision by the UK to do this. There has for a long time been lobbying behind the scenes about the type of F-35 jet that we bought. You'll remember we've got this called the F-35B, which is the type of this stealth fifth-generation warplane that can take off from our aircraft carriers. A lot of people inside the RAF much preferred the F-35A. Sorry, it's a bit technical, but these are the type of jets that take off from the land. They can fly further, and these are the ones that have dual capability. They can carry conventional weapons, but also nuclear warheads. And it's not a question of the UK increasing our stockpiles of actual nuclear weapons. There's no suggestion of that. This would be using those jets to form part, to join in what is already existing, a NATO capability whereby Belgian, German, Dutch F-35 jets are trained and exercised to carry American nuclear bombs. And so the UK is saying that that's what they're going to do. John Healey, when he announced this move, along with the Prime Minister in a statement, said that it was endorsed and recommended by the Defence Review. But the Defence Review itself, the text of that, doesn't clearly recommend doing... Oh, sorry, this is the Dutch Prime Minister. You might listen to him.
Heeft u een beetje geslapen, meneer Schoof, na dat koopwezen diner?
Deborah, we're actually going to not listen to Dick Schooter there, the Dutch Prime Minister, and we are going to get an update on the Middle East situation, and we'll be back with Deborah throughout the morning with all of the most important arrivals. And, of course, as we said, we'll be talking to the Defence Secretary, John Healey, very shortly indeed. Meanwhile, though, let's just get an update on the Middle East situation. And the US President Donald Trump has rejected an intelligence assessment that American bunker-busting bombs may have failed to completely destroy Iran's nuclear sites. Tom Cheshire's in Jerusalem for us this morning and has the very latest as well on the fact that this ceasefire, Tom, I guess, is holding.
Yeah, I think last night was the first night in a long time, at least in the 12-day war, but there have been missile alerts for a very long time before that, when Israelis slept pretty soundly. There were no sirens, there were no alerts. Restaurants were open. The Home Command here said people could gather. There have been almost COVID-like restrictions up till now. So that ceasefire does appear to be holding. Of course, it didn't look like it might be the case when US B-2 bombers, when they hit that Iranian nuclear site. The question's now about how effective that was. There's this leaked intelligence report which has been reported on by US media outlets, including the New York Times, saying this did not, as Donald Trump say, obliterate the Fordo nuclear site. In fact, it only set it back a few months. Now, Trump, he's been taking this personally. personally over the last few days, he really sees this as a signal achievement, and he's lashed out at this on social media, saying that this is an attempt to demean one of the most successful military strikes in history. The nuclear sites in Iran are completely destroyed. Now, I don't think we can say that with confidence either. On the technical side of things, this intelligence report is said to be low confidence. It's based on things like signals intelligence, so intercepting sort of talk from the Iranians about it. We are probably going to have to wait a bit longer for any measure of confidence. And it's worth mentioning to this, it's not just by itself. This was a spectacular strike, but there's lots of other things that have been going on. Nuclear scientists have been killed by Israel over the course of this campaign. That happened in the last 24 hours. They killed one more nuclear scientist. There's a lot of knowledge that has been lost as well. So it all comes in the context of that and, of course, in the context of the ceasefire. That looked fragile yesterday. Donald Trump used some pretty Anglo-Saxon language to stop Israel going and bombing Tehran, as it was reported. But we don't know the contours of what agreement there may be, what Iran signed up to, what Israel signed up to. I think that's what we're looking for next, to make this not just a fragile ceasefire, but something that comes into an enduring peace.
Tom Cheshire, as always, thanks so much, live for us in Jerusalem. Well, here in the UK, the government is facing a growing rebellion over cuts to disability benefits. More than 100 MPs have joined the revolt, which could be big enough to threaten the government's parliamentary majority. That could mean the Prime Minister needs support from the Conservatives.
We've got to get on and make that reform, because the options are leave the system as it is, trapping people and not helping them. That's not a Labour option. The Labour option is to reform it and make it fit for the future. So we're going to press ahead with these reforms.
I'm just making it very clear to Keir Starmer that if he will make commitments at the dispatch box to meet our conditions, which are to reduce the welfare budget, to get people into work and not have tax rises, then we can support his bill.
Well, Serena's here to talk about this. And clearly, the government has been taken by surprise by the scale of opposition within their own party towards this bill.
Completely. Over 100 Labour MPs now backing that amendment that could thwart the bill completely and completely essentially disrupt their whole welfare plans. This was their idea of getting £5 billion a year, but Labour rebels say that by the government's own figures, that will cost about 3 million families £2,000 by 2030. But you're right about not understanding the kind of parliamentary arithmetic. The numbers are going up. Ministers were asked yesterday to ring around and calm these rebels down. What actually happened is that number went up and continues to go up. You've got Sadiq Khan publicly backing the rebels as well. So, yes, potentially not properly calculated by the whips as well.
And what's the government line on this at the moment? I mean, Pat McFadden yesterday on the programme was making it clear that they're going to plough on regardless. Any signs 24 hours on that they're changing their view on that yet or not?
I mean, behind the scenes, they must be thinking about how they can do it. I don't know how they think they can proceed as planned. I mean, the government has been trying to squeeze the number down voting for this amendment, but as we discussed, amendment is not the right word for it because it could completely thwart the bill. But their soft power of ringing round, asking rebels, apparently the mood has changed from threatening them from deselections reportedly to now begging Labour MPs to vote for it. But that hasn't seemed to change, and this vote is meant to be happening on Tuesday. So the clock is running down. Keir Starmer's at NATO. He's not around to personally invite MPs in to kind of try and convince them. I think they'll have to rethink over this weekend what they're going to do.
And obviously, if the government did abandon in full this policy, apart from creating a headache of a threat to their authority, it creates a different problem, which is already in the Chancellor's numbers, is the money that they would save on this of some £5 billion she'd have to then find elsewhere in the autumn.
Exactly. And it's a huge amount of money, £5 billion. Fiscal credibility was a big part of their project, a big part of their election. She says she doesn't want to change her fiscal rules. This is a big part of their economic project, as well as being a political misstep. This could also be an economic misstep. And if they have to delay this bill or even change it in a significant way, they're going to have to find that money somewhere else. Is that tax rises? Is that changing her fiscal rules? Whatever that could be, it puts Rachel Reeves in a very difficult position and potentially rowing back on some quite, bold things that she's been saying that she won't do. So it's not just a blow to their political credibility, but their economic plans as well.
Serena, great stuff as always. Very much appreciated. Serena Barkising on all of the key domestic political news as things stand. And we're going to put that to the Defence Secretary very shortly. Of course, it won't be the top of the agenda set of items for him. The top of the agenda does revolve around what's going on at the NATO summit. And let's just summarise what some of the front pages are saying before we speak to the Defence Secretary. Well, the Times highlighting that the UK will buy a new squadron of fighter jets to match Russia and China for the first time since the Cold War. Let's use that to speak now to the Defence Secretary, John Healey, who we are able to bring in. A very good morning to you, Defence Secretary. Thanks so much for joining us.
Good morning. It's a pleasure.
Talk us through the rationale for adding 12 F-35As to the RAF squadron.
Thank you. This is a recognition, as our Strategic Defence Review said when we published it 3 weeks ago, that we're facing increasing threats, we're facing rising nuclear risks, and it recommended that we looked at buying this new type of jet. It recommended also that the UK considered playing a part in the established NATO nuclear mission. So that's what 3 weeks on we're announcing that we will do. We'll buy these jets. They'll allow us to train, do regular fast jet training. They'll do all the sort of combat missions for regular conventional 5th generation fast jets. But they'll also be capable in extreme circumstances of being able to participate in the nuclear mission for NATO. And by doing that, we're reinforcing the deterrence that NATO can provide to all to help protect all 35 nations. And they're also reinforcing the programme that this supports, 20,000 jobs right across Britain and another 100 plus companies in the supply chain. So this is about strengthening the alliance and the UK's contribution. It's about strengthening our industrial base, but it's also about strengthening NATO's deterrence and therefore protecting us all within the 32 NATO nations. And this will be part of what Keir Starmer tells the other NATO leaders this afternoon when they meet here in The Hague.
Let's just dive into why exactly. This is quite a big strategic change, both in the fact that currently our nuclear weapons are, of course, carried via submarine, but also we're not directly involved in the NATO first approach on nuclear weapons. The Defence Review, I think I'm right in saying, stopped short of explicitly recommending this. I think it suggested that we should explore it. And on top of that, Lord Robertson, who carried out the review, in a Commons Select Committee hearing, said recently he wasn't enthusiastic about the UK having tactical nuclear weapons delivered by air. So this is a decision you're taking yourself without the support explicitly of the Defence Review?
No, the Defence Review, Lord Robertson's review, and he led it brilliantly, recommends that the UK considers playing an enhanced role in the NATO nuclear mission. This is the NATO nuclear mission. That's what we are announcing and have decided that we will do, entirely in line with the recommendations that we published 3 weeks ago. It's entirely separate from our... This is not the UK taking on and having a new UK nuclear weapon. It's playing a part in an established programme that carries US weapons in extreme circumstances. And it complements the continuing independent, sovereign NATO deterrent that we run from some of our submarines and that has been our ultimate guarantor of security and the ultimate deterrent for us and for NATO allies for decades now.
Clearly, it's been announced that we're going to get to 3.5% of core defence spending by 2035. A significant uplift from where we are now. I get that 2035 is a way off. But in order to get there, then during the course of this Parliament, we need to make quite considerable headway to that number. Can we expect the Chancellor this autumn to outline how by 2029 this Parliament will get to, I guess, 2.8, 2.9% would be required if that pledge by 2035 is to be seen as credible?
Well, you're right. All 32 nations in NATO will sign up to a new benchmark, a new NATO target, if you like, of 5% in 2035. That is both core defence spending and the spending that we all need to do on wider national security, that's energy security, cyber security, border security. The question now is what we're doing, and we're increasing defence spending by $5 billion in this year. Will increase over the next 2 years, the biggest increase since the end of the Cold War. And in this Parliament, we're showing exactly how we're going to pay for it. And so we've said that we will pay for that record increase in defence investment by switching money out of overseas development aid. And so just as we've done in this Parliament to set out and show how we pay for the increased defence spending, as we look to meet the ambition in the next Parliament towards the bigger 5% benchmark in 2035, in the next Parliament, we'll also show how we will then pay for that.
But with all due respect, Defence Secretary, we're at 2.3, and you've outlined how by this Parliament you'll get to 2.5. It is entirely meaningless to claim by 2035 you'll get to 3.5 unless you now update what you're going to do this Parliament. You're essentially just saying, we'll leave it to the next government. It's got nothing to do with us.
No, on the contrary. Look, I spent last night with all 31 other defence ministers, and not a single defence minister and not a single one of the 32 governments will come to this NATO summit with a fully worked out 10-year budget plan. What people can see...
Defence Secretary, forgive me for interrupting. Forgive me for interrupting on this. We don't want 10 years, we want 4 years, the remainder of this Parliament. And if you don't get at least a third of the way to closing the gap of this pledge you're making, then it's entirely uncredible. And again, it's not just about you. I'm sure you want to spend it. It's about the Chancellor. If she doesn't outline how she will give you the money, this Parliament, to close that gap, this announcement is entirely uncredible.
Well, people can make their own judgments about what's credible. They can see that in this year, we're increasing defence spending by £5 billion. They can see in 2 years' time we will increase it to a record level that we've not seen in this country since 2010, a record increase since the end of the Cold War. They will see us moving money out of overseas development in order to fund what is the most important duty of government and responding to the threats. And they will see the way that we are using the increased defence spending as a defence dividend that helps reinforce the British industrial base, that brings jobs, high skills, new opportunities for young people right across the country. They'll make their own decisions about that. And just as we have shown, when we make a commitment, we say how we will meet it. In the next Parliament, we will also then set out how we will meet the ambition of 3% on the road to this new benchmark that the NATO leaders will agree this afternoon of 5% for core defence, as well as more national resilience and national security.
You're right, they will make a judgment. And what's clear today, Defence Secretary, is that despite this big announcement, there's no further spending from recent announcements onwards this Parliament. You're leaving all of the hard work to be done next Parliament, and I think a lot of people will see that that makes this seem highly uncredible. Let's talk about...
On the contrary, we're doing the hard work now. We're doing the hard work this year. We're doing the hard work over the next couple of years. We've made the hard decisions to switch overseas development aid funding into defence. And my job as Defence Secretary is to make sure that that brings not just stronger armed forces, greater British security, a stronger contribution to NATO, but it also brings the jobs, the skills, the opportunities that mean that we can benefit our economy and drive growth in this country as well.
Again, with all due respect, you're talking about how you'll spend the money you're given, not if you'll be given the money. I know we're close to out of time, so a quick final question. What is your understanding as to the scale of damage the US strike did to Iran's nuclear capabilities over the weekend?
Well, it's for the US to report any assessment they have of the battle damage from the bombing that they did of the nuclear installations in Iran. The important thing now is that we have a ceasefire. And when you hear the 32 leaders this afternoon here at the NATO summit discuss the Middle East, discuss this ceasefire, all, including President Trump, will be urging now a diplomatic path, because in the end, that's the way that we can best guarantee that Iran can never recover a program or never get a nuclear weapon in the future. But much more importantly, it's also the potential for bringing a wider stability and security to the Middle East. And that's something that you will hear Keir Starmer argue, President Trump argue, and there'll be a unified view from the 32 nations here.
Defence Secretary, thank you so much for your time. We always appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
John Healey there from the NATO summit. More coverage to come from that throughout the morning. Arrivals ongoing. We'll speak to Latvia's Minister for Foreign Affairs next.
Our app gives you the very best of Sky News wherever you are. Breaking news, videos and analysis.
Evidence of the crisis.
Podcasts, watching us live.
Live here from Washington.
Wherever you get your podcast.
All in one place. And all at just the touch of a screen. The Sky News app. Get the full story first.
Turkey is burying its dead. Whole families died in this collapse. Generations wiped out. I'm Siobhan Robbins, Sky's Europe correspondent based here in Berlin. This is just a small sample of the deadly arsenal taken off the streets. Anyone could say, I'll do that, and then have to go and shoot someone.
Yes.
Sky News. Get the full story first.
Welcome back to The Breakfast Show. We're coming up in just a moment. We'll be back live at the NATO summit and we'll be talking to Latvia's foreign minister. But first, a reminder of our top stories this hour. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte says there's absolute clarity that the US is totally committed to NATO and totally committed to Article 5. He's been speaking to reporters in the last half hour before meeting with world leaders at the summit in The Hague. As part of a push to rearm, the UK will buy 12 F-35 stealth jets that can carry nuclear warheads. The government says it's the most significant strengthening in its nuclear capability in a generation. Donald Trump has rejected leaks from the US Defense Department that suggest bunker-busting bombs dropped on Iran's 3 nuclear enrichment sites might only have set the country's nuclear capability back by just months. More Labour MPs have signalled they're willing to rebel over the government's welfare cuts. That's as Conservative leader Kemi Badenoch says her party could back the bill, but she's laid out conditions for the support. Well, let's now talk to Latvia's Minister of Foreign Affairs, Baiba Braze, joins us from the NATO summit. A very good morning to you. Thank you so much for joining us. What is your take overall to the extent to which NATO is as strong as it once was?
Good morning, London. Good to be back on Sky News. And indeed, NATO is strong, and the both commitment to increase defense spending, but also defense industry production, which we need to make sure that our troops have what they need in terms of capabilities, munition, but also the both defensive, offensive capabilities, and as Britain did also the nuclear deterrence capabilities. It all requires political will, but also commitment. And that is what we are seeing here at NATO. NATO is the strongest defense alliance in the world. It's political military alliance, and it has kept peace in our nations for all this time since 1949. And I think the task for all of us as leaders, as political leaders, is to make sure that our people can continue to live in peace, security, but also, of course, that is a precondition for prosperity.
I'm interested in your take. We had an exclusive interview yesterday with President Zelensky, and in it, he suggested in 3 to 5 years that President Putin might test NATO by invading in perhaps just a small way, but nonetheless doing so, invading a NATO country. And the suggestion was it would be one of the smaller Baltic states. Do you think that's possible? And do you think that comment from President Zelensky is realistic? Is it a real threat to a country like yours?
For now, we are all committed really to ensuring that Ukraine's capability for self-defense is there, both in terms of political commitment, but also military supplies, intel information, economic assistance, and so on and so forth. Ukraine is defending herself. It's doing that in accordance with Article 51 of the United Nations Charter against the external aggression of a nuclear-armed Russia. Russia is not getting its objectives. It's more than 3 years in the war. It has lost more than 1 million soldiers, killed and wounded, severely wounded. And in the same time, it has progressed just by a few kilometers. And Russia, of course, is very intent, as you saw in the interview with Butcher in the Kremlin, Putin, that they want to take all of Ukraine. They consider Ukraine being part of Russia. And that is something that I think no one in Europe wants to accept, or in the world for that matter. So against that background, I think that is the utmost priority, while also strengthening NATO. As far as NATO is concerned, it's again the strongest alliance that we have had. Our task is to invest to make sure that deterrence is there, the deterrence both in conventional terms, in nuclear terms, but also against the sub-conventional threats that Russia is implementing. And that, let me say, Russia's warfare doctrine is one. It includes the actions that can be kinetic, as we are seeing in Ukraine, but also sub-conventional. So cyber attacks, information attacks, sabotage, killing of opponents, as we saw they tried with Skripal case. And
forgive me, Foreign Minister, is it realistic what President Zelensky suggested? Do you think it's realistic that President Putin would attempt a military attack, a kinetic ground invasion of a Baltic state in the next 5 years, or is that over the top?
Again, NATO's deterrence is as strong as ever. And in the same time, Russia is conducting these sub-conventional attacks against all of us. So our task is to make sure that we understand what is happening, to be strong at a national and collective level. It's both hard military capabilities, it's intelligence, it's situational awareness, it's knowing what Russia is doing at our borders. And currently, there is very little at our borders in terms of Russia's military activity because it really is bleeding in Ukraine. Ukraine is deterring Russia's any kind of ability to threaten NATO. But again, sub-conventional attacks are happening. So the task for NATO is to be as strong as ever, to make sure that we have that defense industry producing what our forces need. And this is what we are deciding at the summit. So no, Russia cannot invade. And our task is to be as strong as ever as NATO, as collective defense organization, to make sure that doesn't happen.
Has conflict in the Middle East taken the focus of NATO, but perhaps more importantly, the United States from the eastern border of Europe?
President Trump is here. He arrived yesterday. They had a good dinner. The gracious hosts, the Netherlands, the King of Netherlands and the Queen of Netherlands hosted the leaders. And it was a very good discussion, very good meeting, you know. So in those terms, US commitment is as strong as ever. And that what has been confirmed by President Trump himself, but also by a number of other leaders from the US. So we don't have the reason constantly to doubt their commitment. What we have to do, of course, both on European, Canadian, and other side, is to take our security and defense seriously. It has not been exactly fair burden sharing all these years when the US had to take so much on its shoulders. So it's a very natural ask from them. And they're asking also their partners and allies in Southeast Asia, in the Indo-Pacific, that they also have to increase the defense spending, because what China is doing is increasing its nuclear arsenal. It will reach the level of the US warheads in 2030. And in the same time, also the delivery vehicles, the conventional capabilities, whether that's Navy or land forces and so on and so forth.
Thank you so much for joining us, Foreign Minister.
You're very welcome.
Baiba Braze there from Latvia. Well, still to come here on The Breakfast Show. We're going to have much more coverage, of course, from the NATO summit. We'll be right back after this short break.
Over there, to your left. There have been airstrikes every day. Hezbollah are very sensitive about us showing any pictures, and we're being hurried away right now.
It felt akin to riding into some sort of Armageddon.
Many other areas have been hit badly. There are shells coming in every few minutes.
Hear that whistle and that crunch? We know that they're coming from the south of the city, where there's a column of Russian armory.
I'm Alex Crawford, and I'm Sky's special correspondent based in Istanbul.
It's trying to hit us. That's it. It got us then.
There's a lot of action going on. A lot of hits coming in still.
We were the first journalists and the only outsiders to reach the site of the attack several weeks after it happened.
We found from the missile.
It's very difficult to see what around here could be conceived of as a legitimate military target. Only about half a mile from the Turkish coast, a boat seriously overcrowded. This is one of the most severe viruses in the world. Clearly not had very much to eat at all, a lot of them extremely thin and very frail. Look at that sheet of flames, and that has happened within minutes, and now it's coming from both sides, and it's moving this way.
The world's largest falls now down to a trickle in places.
I can't imagine how much plastic is lying at the bottom of this huge lake. Oh!
Getting up close and personal with a rhino.
This is what makes the job so fantastic.
Jubilation in the streets, while some emotional.
This is a political victory for Prime Minister Modi and his Hindu Nationalist Party. I'm Neville Lazarus, and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi. Companies like these are helping India in its trajectory to be a serious player in space exploration. Sky News, get the full story first.
I'm Stephen Murphy, and I'm Sky's Ireland correspondent based here in Dublin.
The waters of Ireland and Britain should be home to great white sharks.
If there are great white sharks in this area, there's no reason they wouldn't come here to feed. It's basically a buffet on a beach.
This could be not only a record-breaking storm, but potentially the most dangerous storm ever to hit Ireland.
Welcome back to The Breakfast Show. Serena's here so we can talk a bit about what's going on at the NATO summit. Of course, arrivals continue. We will bring you the live arrivals of the Prime Minister, expected in the next 20 to 30 minutes, and of other high-profile leaders. Serena, obviously, we were joined by the Defence Secretary a few moments ago. It's tedious when one has to labour the same question, and I don't enjoy doing it. But on this pledge to boost defence spending, it is legitimate to raise the question of how realistic it is, how credible it is, if we don't get told how it's going to be paid for.
Well, I think they're saying it is credible. Essentially, what they're saying on the funding is we're working on it. We're thinking about where it's coming from. We haven't allocated that yet publicly. And I think that's a big problem for the government because fiscal credibility was a big core of what they were offering. So you'd expect any offer that they make comes with a fully formed plan of how they're going to fund it. And they always say that, fully costed, fully planned policies. And here you've got essentially a commitment, signing up to something without that follow-through. Yeah,
I think it goes further than that, though, because there's one thing about making sure you outline how it's paid for. There's another thing on the timeline that the Defence Secretary implied there, which is that all of this new increase comes after the next election. And maybe coming into the next election, they'll outline how it's paid. But if you sit here 10 years away and you're saying all of the increase will come in the latter 6 years, I don't think people are going to look at this and say that's really that believable. Let's bring in Deborah, who's able to join us again now live from the NATO summit. Deborah, Serena and I were just discussing some of the takeaways from the interview with John Healey that we had, and just to summarise for you, a lot of it got dominated by the debate over how credible the boost to core defence spending of 3.5% of GDP by 2035 is. And essentially, what he said was that all of the extra increase will come after the next election. So no further increases until at least 2029, which I guess won't be something that terrifies President Putin.
It won't terrify President Putin, and it will also be disappointing for a number of NATO allies. I know, for example, the Baltic states here have been pushing for this time frame for boosting defence spending to 3.5% for defence, 1.5% for national resilience, to happen at a more rapid pace. They're going to be hitting the target. Lithuania, for example, will meet that mark next year. They wanted the target to be around 2030, I understand. And yet NATO, its strength is that it's an alliance of allies and there's unity, but it's also a weakness because it can only move as fast as the slowest member state. And it seems that 10 years was the timeline that everyone could agree to. And even with that timeline, there are questions about, for example, Spain. The Spanish Prime Minister has come out saying that he believes Spain can meet their capability requirements that they're being asked to do by the alliance without hitting those spending targets. And Donald Trump actually mentioned Spain when he was talking about his commitment or not, his definition, his personal definition of Article 5. He sort of said, the Spain question is clearly on his mind. It's not going to be impressive for him, given that he wants Europe to do a lot more to defend themselves rather than freeloading, in his mind, on the US military.
In terms of the kind of other agenda items for this summit, to what extent is there a feeling, Deborah, that the Middle East in either recent years or months or indeed literally the last couple of weeks took focus off the eastern front of Europe? And is that changed now that there's seemingly a ceasefire or not?
Of course, it dominates headlines, but for the NATO summit, the actual agenda is focused on NATO issues. You won't be surprised to hear that. So it is all about this new defence spending pledge. You'll hear people, the sort of leaders as they're coming through, they're all talking about investment in the defence industrial base. They look to the war in Ukraine and they see that really it is a war of industry as much as it is a war fought on the battlefield. And countries need to absolutely galvanise their ability to produce weapons at mass and at speed, and that's something that they want investment to be going into. They're also, of course, going to be talking about Ukraine. Ukraine is not a member of the alliance. It wants to be. Donald Trump has made clear that that isn't going to happen anytime soon, yet defending Ukraine, ensuring it has the ability to withstand Russia's invasion, that is another core issue. So I'm to keep looking behind my shoulder in case another leader arrives. That's another core subject that the NATO allies will be speaking about. And this summit, let's not forget, it's much shorter than normal. These events tend to drag out a bit, but because they wanted to sort of Trump-proof it and make it as short as possible, so that it would reduce the risk of him leaving earlier. And also, of course, all of the messaging is about showing to Donald Trump that this is an alliance worth being a member of, and everyone going past is being asked about this definition of Article 5. We had the Dutch Prime Minister just now very clearly stating that Article 5 is clearly defined, and that is a direct contradiction of what Donald Trump said yesterday when he seemed to suggest that there are multiple definitions. I don't think his allies would agree.
Deborah, great stuff as always. Thanks so much for that. And as Deborah said, more arrivals expected. The PM is expected to arrive in the next 10 or 15 minutes. We'll be back, of course, with Deborah live in The Hague when that takes place. Let's get you up to speed, though, now on some of the day's other stories. Well, New York could get a socialist mayor. 33-year-old Zoran Mamdani has beaten former Governor Andrew Cuomo in the Democratic primary. He was endorsed by the party's progressive wing and would be the city's first Muslim and Indian American mayor if elected overnight, winning the Democratic Party's nomination in that primary. The government plans to deport foreign prisoners after they've served less than a third of their sentence to free up prisons. New legislation will be introduced to Parliament today in the latest measure to deal with overcrowding. The move could free up around 500 cells per year. Progress in vaccinating children against life-threatening diseases has stalled since 2010 and even gone backwards in some countries. The global study published in The Lancet said the situation was worsened by the COVID pandemic, leaving millions of children unprotected from diseases such as measles, tuberculosis and polio. Thousands of sub-postmasters caught up in the Post Office Horizon scandal are still awaiting compensation as plans are still moving far too slowly. The Public Accounts Committee says the Department of Business and Trade needs to outline what more it will do to ensure every affected postmaster is aware of their options for redress.
This is really quite a simple concept. We should ask the government, we should ask the Post Office really to make a greater effort. I think they're not fulfilling the justice that these people justifiably deserve. And there's an old maxim in the law, justice delayed is justice denied. And these people really need this money to get on with their lives.
Former England manager Gareth Southgate will be among those accepting honours at Windsor Castle today when he receives his knighthood. The 54-year-old was recognised for his services to association football in the New Year's honours. That's the very official language, association football, the other name for it. Sadia's here to talk us through this and some of the other high-profile names that will be getting their gongs today.
Yeah, so when this was announced in December, Gareth Southgate said, or we should say Sir Gareth said that...
Is he Sir Gareth until he's...
I think he's Sir Gareth already. Yeah. All of the copy says he's Sir Gareth. So he said that it would be unlikely that his family would call him Sir Gareth. I think today...
Well, hopefully his family doesn't have to.
I think today they probably will, because it becomes official, as you say, at a ceremony in Windsor Castle. So he is the fourth England manager to get this honour. Do you know who the other three were?
Alf Ramsey.
Yep.
Bobby Robson.
Yep.
And Bobby Charlton.
Walter Winterbottom.
Well, hold on. So Bobby Charlton is a knight as well. Oh, he's not a manager. Sorry, I thought he was not England manager.
Exactly, yeah.
Right.
Sir Gareth, of course, no longer the England manager, resigned last year after that defeat to Spain and, of course, succeeded by Thomas Tuchel. But he was manager for 8 years. He's 54 years old, and, of course, we know him best over the last few years for those semi-finals and finals that he led England to, so consecutive Euro finals in 2020 and 2024, and the 2018 semi-final in Russia, in the Russian World Cup. And, of course, that's where he made that waistcoat really famous. Overall, he took charge of 102 matches, and he's the only England men's team manager to lead them to 2 major tournament finals. Why are you laughing?
I'm laughing, Sadia, because you said us in that. And our Scottish producer is upset that you did so.
I did correct myself.
Which is actually why I'm now going to say it too. because I apologise to all our Scottish viewers or Welsh viewers or Northern Irish viewers on this point, but if it winds my producer up, I'm afraid I'm going to do it. But I agree that Gareth Southgate was one of our managers. No, I guess the question everyone has on this is, we didn't win anything. Does he deserve a knighthood for that? I loved Southgate, I still do, and I think he took us forward an enormous amount. When you fall at the last margin, is it really his fault? Probably not. And I think the offsetting point to this, which I totally acknowledge, he has been through an extraordinary personal journey, from as a player, of course, in Euro 96, missing that crucial penalty, to missing out on the penalty shootout in Euro 2021, and then taking us to another final. I mean, what an amazing, amazing commitment to bouncing back from the lows. But, you know, a knighthood's almost like a trophy. And do you give the trophy for falling at the last hurdle? That's the question.
So I think today, when you think about it, you're probably thinking along those lines. But if you take yourself back to that Euro 2020 final, remember it came a year later, I think, because of COVID, and the feeling around the country at the time, and what it did, you know, ending this, 55-year wait for an appearance at a final for England. I think when you think about the feeling at that time, what it did, if you had asked yourself then,
I agree.
You probably would have said yes, he deserves it.
Net, I agree. But I think he deserves it. But it's a close one, for sure. Sadia, great stuff. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Arise Sir Gareth later on today, or maybe he's already Sir Gareth, but he'll kneel and he'll arise. Right, let's have a look at the weather.
The perfect climate, wherever the destination. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Well, of course, last week was incredibly hot. It's been a little bit cooler this week, but still warmer than you might expect for this time of year. We're looking at temperatures of about 17 in the south today, a bit cooler in the north, with a little bit of rain coming in as well, particularly in the north of Scotland.
The perfect climate, whatever the forecast. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Well, we're going to take a quick break here on Sky News Breakfast. So when we come back, we're going to continue with our live coverage from the NATO summit in The Hague. The Prime Minister is due to arrive. He's next, or maybe two down on the list, so expected in the first 10 minutes or so of the show. We'll have it for you after this break.
Our app gives you the very best of Sky News wherever you are. Breaking news, videos and analysis.
Evidence of the crisis.
Podcasts, watching us live.
Live here from Washington.
Wherever you get your podcast.
All in one place. And all at just the touch of a screen. The Sky News app. Get the full story first.
Good morning to you. It's 8 o'clock. The Prime Minister's just arrived at the NATO summit after announcing the biggest change in Britain's nuclear posture since the end of the Cold War.
But back home, Sir Keir Starmer faces down a growing mutiny over disability benefit cuts.
It's Wednesday, the 25th of June. Your headlines. Britain is to buy 12 fighter jets from the US capable of carrying nuclear warheads. We'll expect to hear from the Prime Minister shortly. World leaders are arriving at The Hague for what's shaping up to be a consequential NATO summit.
There is absolute clarity that the United States is totally committed to NATO, totally committed to Article 5.
Good morning to you. Well, the Prime Minister has just arrived at the NATO summit in The Hague moments ago, but he didn't stop to take any questions in the same way that Mark Rutte, who we just saw there, had done so. This was literally a minute or two ago, the PM arriving at the NATO summit, and Deborah Haynes is there for us and able to join us. So, Deborah, we're going to continue to watch these pictures of the PM. Or did he then walk straight past you, as some of the other leaders did, but just decided not to stop and take any questions?
He did. There are even two little cub reporters here that look about 10 years old, and he didn't even stop to speak to them. Leaders, when they arrive, they have the choice to sort of run the gauntlet in front of all of the world's media that's waiting here to talk to them. Many of them do stop and take questions. Like you just said, Mark Rutte, the NATO Secretary-General, he has to stop because this is his gig. But the Dutch Prime Minister did. We had the Finnish Foreign Minister speaking to us too. I believe another leader is just arriving, so you'll probably hear a bit of commotion behind me as they choose whether or not to stop and take questions or keep on walking. The Prime Minister clearly felt that he will probably speak later. They usually do press conferences after the main business of the summit. But I did, I tried to ask him whether he agrees with Donald Trump that there are numerous definitions of Article 5. That was something that the US President said on the way to the summit yesterday, and it clearly unnerving people here because any kind of suggestion that Mr. Trump is not fully behind the Article 5 principle, which states that an attack on one ally is an attack on all. It's this collective defence principle that has been the bedrock of deterrence for the alliance since its foundation 76 years ago. Any undermining of that is hugely damaging for the allies and their ability to deter, in particular, what they view as an imminent and increasing threat from Vladimir Putin's Russia.
Deborah, if you can, stick with us and let's have a listen now. Keen to get your reaction to this. So some of the back and forth I had with the Defence Secretary last hour about the credibility of the increase in defence spending that's being announced.
Just as we've done in this Parliament to set out and show how we pay for the increased defence spending, as we look to meet the ambition in the next Parliament towards the bigger 5% benchmark in 2035, in the next Parliament, we'll also show how we will then pay for that.
But with all due respect, Defence Secretary, we're at 2.3, and you've outlined how by this Parliament you'll get to 2.5. It is entirely meaningless to claim by 2035 you'll get to 3.5 unless you now update what you're going to do this Parliament. You're essentially just saying, we'll leave it to the next government. It's got nothing to do with us.
No, on the contrary. Look, I spent last night with all 31 other defence ministers, and not a single defence minister and not a single one of the 32 governments will come to this NATO summit with a fully worked out 10-year budget plan. What people can see...
Defence Secretary, forgive me for interrupting. Forgive me for interrupting on this. We don't want 10 years. We want 4 years, the remainder of this Parliament. And if you don't get at least a third of the way to closing the gap of this pledge you're making, then it's entirely uncredible. And again, it's not just about you. I'm sure you want to spend it. It's about the Chancellor. If she doesn't outline how she will give you the money, this Parliament, to close that gap, this announcement is entirely uncredible.
Well, people can make their own judgments about what's credible. They can see that in this year, we're increasing defence spending by £5 billion. They can see in 2 years' time we will increase it to a record level that we've not seen in this country since 2010, a record increase since the end of the Cold War.
Deborah's still there listening in as the arrivals continue behind her. This is an American-made car, so it could be the president. If it is the president, we'll, of course, pause for the arrivals and listen in. But Deborah, he's got a point that I don't think any of the governments are announcing exactly how they're going to get to the level by 2035. But that's no defence, I guess, to suggest that we also don't have to make the pledge credible.
Well, yeah, and so I'm just trying to see who it is getting out of the car, because there's a screen up here that we can watch, and you can often sort of judge the... it looks like it could be the Italian Prime Minister, maybe. I don't want to make a guess in case I get that wrong. You can usually judge the importance of the leader based on the size of the motorcade. But yeah, no, it's a really good point. There are lots of allies, especially those that who share borders with Russia, that want this.
Deborah, I just mentioned that is Susie Wilkes that's coming in right now. Susie Wilkes, of course, is President Trump's chief of staff. So let's just keep an eye. This presumably now, as the cars pull forward, I mean President Trump is about to come in next. And Deborah, you've said this already. The whole NATO summit has been rearranged, rejigged to dance to his tune. He is a man who likes the spotlight. He likes to stop at press conferences. So even if the Prime Minister decided to sprint down the gauntlet rather than to pause and listen, we can probably imagine President Trump will stop for some questions.
Yes, I think everybody is hoping that he will stop, and it looks like we don't have to wait too much longer to find out. Interesting that he is not one of the last to arrive, but actually one of the first, if that is indeed, as it seems to be, his motorcade, or maybe it's just his team coming beforehand and he will be coming later. But yeah, this is the Donald Trump show. It was last time he was president, because America is, of course, this is an alliance this is a club of allies, but nobody makes any pretense that the most important ally is not squarely the United States. They account for about 80% of military fighting power, and more than that, they're the enablers that the US military have in terms of their intelligence feeds, their satellite imagery. It enables the armed forces of most of the NATO members, in particular the UK, to be that more effective. Like, our ability to target and strike is severely curtailed if America isn't fighting alongside us. So that is why everybody here is focused on Donald Trump and wanting to hear what he has to say, and wanting to hear that clear sense that he will commit to Article 5, and that's why yesterday's remarks about numerous definitions, when there is only one definition, did trigger alarm bells.
On all of this, I mean, it seems like some of Trump's team have arrived, but he wasn't in that initial motorcade. Of course, it would be wildly significant if he only sent team members and didn't arrive himself, but that's certainly not the expectation at this point. Deborah, just bring it all back. President Trump and that debate I just had with the defense secretary. Is the announcement, I mean, there's an important question about what the announcement signals to foreign adversaries, but I think there's also an important consideration of whether it is enough to placate our biggest ally, and President Trump in particular. Have we had any indication from him yet, since he arrived there late yesterday, as to whether he's satisfied by the pledge if it's not yet fully funded?
Well, Mark Rutte gave a few words about the dinner that they all had last night, saying that it was, that Donald Trump was in a really good mood, and that they had really good conversations. But the US president, when he was speaking to reporters on the plane, oh, here we go. We have a leader behind me. I don't know if you want to maybe listen in.
Let's not listen in. If you can continue, Deborah, please do. If you can't, then we'll understand. But we're much more interested in your analysis of what we're expecting from Donald Trump today.
Yes, I'll speak a bit quieter then. So he basically said on the plane, on the way here, singled out Spain and sort of expressed unhappiness that the Spanish Prime Minister has sort of come out and said that while his country is signing up to this new defence investment pledge of 5%, he isn't going to be anticipating hitting it, which obviously is not very pleasing for the US president.
Deborah, thanks for that. My apologies for putting you on the spot there. The Estonian Prime Minister making his comments on arrival. We'll continue to monitor those for you. Deborah's there, as you know, and waiting for some of the more significant arrivals, including, of course, the US President. Serena, so much of what is going on here, of course, comes back to funding. So much of it comes back to whether or not there is the money to pay for these things. And there's a potential headache brewing for the government that might take another £5 billion away from their spending.
Yes, this is the welfare rebellion, which has corralled over 100 MPs, Labour MPs, Keir Starmer's own MPs, to rebel against one of their potentially biggest flagship policies, their welfare bill. Now, this is what Keir Starmer says is a clear moral case. He says he wants to change how universal credit is working, PIP as well. But Labour MPs say that by the government's own figures, 3.2 million families will actually lose out about £2,000 by 2030. So they are really digging their heels in. They're saying they can't vote for this. And what they're doing is they are essentially putting in an amendment to this bill, which, if gets voted on, would completely thwart the government's plans completely. So it's quite a huge rebellion, and it can't be overstated that this is probably the biggest threat to Keir Starmer's premiership since he got into office, which is only less than a year ago. It's coming up to their anniversary. This is a crucial time for Keir Starmer, as he's pledging, as you say, on the world stage, new money for new jets, signing up to more defence spending, and potentially he could have a £5 billion black hole based on these plans and this rebellion.
Serena, as always, thanks so much for that. Let's get you up to speed now on the other big international story of the day, of course, in the Middle East. Tom Cheshire's live in Jerusalem for us. Tom, bring us up to speed on the very latest, including, I guess, most importantly, the extent to which the ceasefire was observed overnight.
Yeah, I think last night was the first night the Israelis here have slept better. There wasn't a siren compared to just before that ceasefire came in, where there are 6 waves of ballistic missiles. It has felt a lot quieter. Now, as a result of that, people are looking at what has happened, who's won over the last few days, and questions in the US about how successful that strike by the B-2 bombers was on the Fordo nuclear site. There's been a leaked intelligence report reported on by American media saying it's only put Iran's nuclear program back by a few months. It hasn't obliterated it, as Donald Trump says. Well, Donald Trump has reacted very angrily to that on social media, accusing the outlets of being fake news and insisting that the nuclear sites in Iran are completely destroyed. Now, I think it's going to take a bit more time to really understand the extent of the damage. This is underground. It's hard to verify, especially from satellite pictures that we've seen of those sort of puncture holes that are happening. And the other part of that is it's not just about the sites themselves. It is part of this broader ceasefire agreement. In terms of the immediate future, well, all sides here have claimed victory. In Tehran, they held a victory celebration in a square yesterday, so they want to frame this as their pressure on what they would call the Zionist regime, Israel and the US, that strike, a very telegraphed strike on the Qatari military base, the US military base, bringing them victory as they see it. Israel has claimed that they've eliminated the dual threat of the ballistic missiles and Iran's nuclear program. But I think a lot depends on the contours of that ceasefire deal. What we have right now is both sides so far have refrained from engaging in any more attacks. But were there concessions promised to Iran? Were there promises made by Iran in terms of that nuclear program? We've had the might, and now really we're waiting to see what the diplomacy entails and what it means for the wider region, because over the last 12 days, of course, we've had this very dramatic, very worrying war between Israel and Iran, which the US entered, which the US escalated. At the same time, though, the war in Gaza that Israel is waging there, with tens of thousands of civilians killed, with Israeli hostages still being held by Hamas, that is still raging. And perhaps that's where attention turns now. It is a challenge, but potentially also an opportunity to end that war too.
Tom Cheshire, great stuff. Many thanks for that. As you can see on the live pictures, we're continuing to monitoring the arrivals. Mark Carney was the latest to step out. We are waiting to see if Mark Carney does make live comments, and we might return to them if he does. Of course, Prime Minister Starmer didn't. He just walked straight in. We'll monitor those arrivals. Mark Carney, the latest to arrive. Let's get the Conservatives' view on all of the day's news. The Shadow Work and Pension Secretary, Helen Whately, joins me now. A very good morning to you. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning.
Lots happening overseas. Of course, with the Work and Pensions brief, there's worth picking up with you, first of all, on domestic news. Just outline for us the Conservative position on the welfare bill that the government is putting through Parliament at the moment.
Yes, of course. I mean, the starting position is that our welfare system isn't working. Over 2,000 people a day are going on to sickness benefits. We're spending more on welfare than we're spending on defence. So there's both a human cost and a financial cost. So we want to see the welfare bill come down, and we want to see more people going into work. The problem is that Keir Starmer's legislation doesn't do that. And also, he's really struggling to get the support of his MPs to back welfare savings. So we have made an offer to Keir Starmer, which we will support him on welfare savings if he does three things. Firstly, he has to commit to bringing the welfare bill down properly. Secondly, he has to commit to getting more people into work. And thirdly, he has to commit to not putting up taxes in the autumn. And if he does that, he'll have our support.
It's this sort of extra pledge, some might suggest is political game playing. Obviously, you want the welfare bill to go further. There's a bill in front of you that they've proposed, and it comes down to the bottom line question of, in principle, is it good to see some welfare reform that is ultimately a goal that you pursue, or because it doesn't go far enough, do you reject the bill? Which of those two is most likely?
Look, I mean, this is a constructive offer that we are making in the national interest, because I think it is very important that the welfare bill comes down, but also we need to see more people going into work. And there are real flaws with the legislation that Labour is bringing forwards. So on the one hand, it doesn't save nearly enough. The bill's going up to around £100 billion by the end of this decade, and their plans only bring it down by about £5 billion, so that is not enough. Also, it's very flawed. For instance, what they're planning will mean greater cuts to people who are older and, for instance, with physical disabilities like struggling with arthritis, and have less impact on the particular growth of younger people who are going on to sickness benefits with things like common mental health problems, anxiety and neurodiversity. And critically, the legislation they're proposing doesn't get anybody into work. Their own assessment is that there will be zero extra people into work. So there's a real problem with what they're bringing forward. We want them to fix it. We're giving them a signal how they can do it. They need to do that, and then they will get our support.
We got more to discuss on this particular topic, and hopefully we'll have time at the end to come back to it. But the Prime Minister's just been speaking on arrival at the NATO summit, and let's listen to that, and perhaps we'll get your reaction afterwards. The Prime Minister moments ago.
Well, NATO is as relevant and as important today as it's ever been. We live in a very volatile world, and today is about the unity of NATO, showing that strength. We're bigger than we were before, we're stronger than we were before. There's a historic commitment in relation to spending. And for me, as Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, it's important that we play an integral part, because the safety and security of our citizens in the UK is my first duty as Prime Minister. I take that extremely seriously. And in relation to our contribution, the increased defence spend, obviously that goes to our security and our safety, but it also is the engine of growth and jobs in the United Kingdom. So this is a very important meeting of the summit. NATO comes together at an important point, stronger and larger and more determined than ever.
But will you be asking him for clarity?
Well, look, I think it's very important that we stand here as allies, and we do stand here as allies, coming together, absolutely committed to the importance of NATO, particularly at this point in a very volatile world.
You've committed to buying 12 new F-35s, which will be nuclear capable, despite the Strategic Defence Review quite recently saying that wasn't their favourite option. Why have you done that?
Well, the Strategic Defence Review said that we should look at options, including the F-35As. We have now taken decisive action in relation to the F-35As. That's the right decision for our country. It's the right decision for NATO. And it really comes at an important point in a volatile world where we do need a stronger, more diverse resilient security.
And what will they give us that we didn't have before?
Well, they give us a diversity of capability and a capability that we didn't have before, and that is really important.
The Prime Minister there moments ago arriving at the NATO summit. I'm here with the Conservatives' shadow Work and Pensions Secretary, Helen Whately. Helen, your reaction to, I guess, the central part of that, where the Prime Minister thinks Donald Trump, the US President, is as committed to NATO and Article 4 as the US has ever been?
Well, the US is traditionally and continues to be our most important ally, and their commitment to NATO is really important, therefore. But what does worry me is we've got the Prime Minister talking up defence, and he's right, we need to invest more in defence, but he needs to get the public finances under control. He needs to get welfare under control, and so he's busy doing the thing that prime ministers like to do and go to international things. He really needs to sort out the situation domestically, and also actually sort out what Rachel Reeves is doing to the economy. Because unless we've got the money to spend on defence, none of this matters for anything.
It's right that he's at the NATO summit.
Well, it is important that he attends that. But he also needs to get the domestic situation under control. And he can't be in a situation where, despite his large majority, he can't get his MPs to back his legislative programme.
12 F-35s, is that a good thing to spend around £1 billion on?
Well, I think it's important for us to invest in defence and the equipment that we need as a country. So, as Conservatives, we support the government making those kind of decisions, but they do need to work out how they're going to fund these kind of things.
Overall, are you pleased that the government's announced this pledge, along with other NATO allies, to get to 3.5% of core defence spending by 2035?
Yeah, we're committed to increasing defence spending as well, and Conservatives made a commitment on that in our manifesto. However, it's got to be genuine defence spending, and what we've seen Keir Starmer do so far is just add together other bits of spending to try and come up with a higher percentage. And he's sort of throwing other things in. The question is, what next to meet that? What do you throw in next to meet that so-called commitment? What he actually has to do is invest in core defence.
Just coming back to the welfare bill and what's likely to unfold from here. If there's really the prospect of the government being defeated in a vote, is that not a higher political prize for you as Conservatives than pushing through a bill?
So we want to be and are a constructive opposition, and we will act in the national interest. But we won't just back a bill as it is without it being fixed in the ways that I said it needs to be. It's not a good bill at the moment. We need Keir Starmer to make those commitments, to make proper welfare savings, to get more people into work, and the third thing of not putting up taxes as well.
Helen Whately, thanks for joining us. Good to see you this morning, the Shadow Work and Pensions Secretary from the Conservatives. Let's have a look at the weather now.
A bright start and always a warm welcome. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
It's looking unsettled into next week. Driest in the southeast. It's mostly fine now and warm in the south, but Wales, southwest England and the West Midlands are rather murky and damp. There are showers in the north too. The UK will stay mainly dry this morning with some sunny spells, but low cloud and patchy drizzle over Wales and the southwest will extend into East Anglia. Elsewhere, northern Britain can expect a few more showers, while Northern Ireland and Ireland look mostly dry but increasingly cloudy. It'll be very warm in the humid southeast, near average elsewhere. Wales and central England will brighten later and showers in the north will fade, but Ireland, Northern Ireland and southwest Britain will see locally heavy and potentially thundery showers moving in.
A bright start and always a warm welcome. Qatar Airways sponsors the weather.
So to come here on the breakfast show, as the NATO summit continues, we'll be speaking to the former Foreign Secretary and Chair of the Intelligence Security Committee, Sir Malcolm Rifkind.
Turkey is burying its dead.
Whole families died in this collapse. Generations wiped out. I'm Siobhan Robbins, Sky's Europe correspondent based here in Berlin.
This is just a small sample of the deadly arsenal taken off the streets.
Anyone could say, I'll do that, and then have to go and shoot someone.
Yes.
Sky News, get the full story first.
I'm Stephen Murphy, and I'm Sky's Ireland correspondent based here in Dublin.
The waters of Ireland and Britain should be home to great white sharks.
If there are great white sharks in this area, there's no reason they wouldn't come here to feed. It's basically a buffet on a beach.
This could be not only a record-breaking storm, but potentially the most dangerous storm ever to hit Ireland.
Let's get back out to the NATO summit in The Hague. Arrivals continue. Deborah Haynes is there for us live. Deborah, who have been the most high-profile latest arrivals? And, of course, we did hear from the Prime Minister briefly as well.
Yeah, so we've had the leaders of Finland and also the Prime Minister of Norwegian have just come through. They both stopped and spoke, and again, it's this message of unity that, unsurprisingly, all of the allies are wanting to portray, and that's not a surprise when it comes to European NATO members. But what is key is what Donald Trump is going to say when he arrives. We all heard what he said on the plane on the way over when he talked about there being numerous definitions of Article 5, which is the collective defence clause, a founding principle of the alliance, that an attack on one is an attack on all. And every single leader that's come past here and has been asked that question about Article 5 has stated very, very frankly that Article 5, there is only one definition. But also stated that they really believe, they have full confidence that the US is fully committed to the alliance. They're talking about, that they are increasing their defence spending, and that's not to do with appealing to Donald Trump. They're saying it's to do with the Russian threat. Hold on, we just have another leader arriving. I don't know if you want to have a listen in, or shall I maybe have a listen in?
For Deborah to continue when comments are being made behind her. We're not going to take these comments live, but instead we will just listen again to the comments Keir Starmer gave a few moments ago.
Well, NATO is as relevant and as important today as it's ever been. We live in a very volatile world, and today is about the unity of NATO, showing that strength. We're bigger than we were before, we're stronger than we were before. There's a historic commitment in relation to spending. And for me, as Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, it's important that we play an integral part, because the safety and security of our citizens in the UK is my first duty as Prime Minister. I take that extremely seriously. And in relation to our contribution, the increased defence spend, obviously that goes to our security and our safety, but it also is the engine of growth and jobs in the United Kingdom. So this is a very important meeting of the summit. NATO comes together at an important point, stronger and larger and more determined than ever.
But will you be asking him for clarity?
Well, look, I think it's very important that we stand here as allies, and we do stand here as allies, coming together, absolutely committed to the importance of NATO, particularly at this point in a very volatile world.
You've committed to buying 12 new F-35s, which will be nuclear capable, despite the Strategic Defence Review quite recently saying that wasn't their favourite option. Why have you done that?
Well, the Strategic Defence Review said that we should look at options, including the F-35As. We have now taken decisive action in relation to the F-35As. That's the right decision for our country. It's the right decision for NATO. And it really comes to an important point in a volatile world where we do need a stronger, more diverse, resilient security.
And what will they give us that we didn't have before?
Well, they give us a diversity of capability and a capability that we didn't have before, and that is really important.
the Prime Minister there shortly after he arrived at the NATO summit in The Hague. Arrivals continue, and we'll go back live as and when we see President Trump. But let's speak, though, now to Sir Malcolm Rifkin, the former Foreign Secretary and also the former chair of the Intelligence and Security Committee. Sir Malcolm, great to see you as always. Firstly, your take on the extent to which NATO means as much as it once did. Is there a lot of hot air coming from the President, but he's really still committed, or is it a genuine fear that he's not?
Well, it's certainly looking better today than it was when he became president several months ago, because there was a lot of ambiguity, a lot of uncertainty whether he attached any importance at all to NATO. And the fact that he's here is important at the NATO summit. But also, we know this is going to be a successful summit because all the member states have committed themselves to working towards a 5% of the GDP for defense expenditure, which is exactly what the president also was seeking. And against the wider climate of everything that's going on in the Middle East with China and so forth, it's a good moment for NATO to be able to seem united. So I think it'll be a pretty good summit. I may be proved wrong, but that's what the evidence looks like at the moment.
So, Malcolm, I had a bit of a clash an hour or two ago with the Defence Secretary about how credible our pledge to increase defence spending was.
Yes.
Is that unfair, or is it legitimate? I mean, it's a recent announcement, but if we're saying we're going to hit 3.5% of core defence spending by 2035, does a big chunk of that increase have to come this Parliament for it to be realistic?
Well, I would, it would surprise you to know that as a former defence secretary, I would say the earlier the better. And that's what obviously the armed forces would wish. But, you know, we don't live in an ideal world. I've been very concerned at some of the language used by the Prime Minister until recently when he talked about aspirations towards increases of defence expenditure. I think that language is now hardened. I think we can now assume that with the commitment to the 5% figure that's being announced today, that the present British government will deliver. Exactly when, I'm not going to pretend I know. It will partly depend not just on finances, it will depend on what's happening with Russia and Ukraine, how aggressive Russia is continuing to be over the next few years.
Do you think situations in the Middle East have taken focus away from the eastern flank of Europe?
Well, in one sense they have, but in one sense it's also been very valuable. We were being led to believe some time ago by President Trump and by his colleagues that, well, of course, America is now going to focus on China. America's a Pacific power as well as an Atlantic one. China's a big issue, and the possible attack on Taiwan from the Chinese government. Now, the fact that the president unexpectedly, until very recently, was prepared to intervene so dramatically in the Middle East by using the bunker buster bombs and by a huge wave of American aircraft flying across the Atlantic, flying 17,000 miles to take part in that. Now, that was the Middle East. If he's prepared to do that for that particular objective, then it looks as if the commitment to working with European countries and NATO is still strong. And one other point on that, he wants to make America great again. Well, one of the things that does make America great is that it's the American president who is always the commander-in-chief of NATO, the world's most powerful military force, if it ever needs to be used. So it'd be a pretty odd way of showing how you're making America great if it was to weaken NATO, the world's most powerful military alliance that defends democracy and freedom for so many countries.
So, Malcolm, clearly today we're announcing that we're buying 12 F-35A fighter jets. They're made by Lockheed Martin, an American company. Some components are made here, but they're very much an American jet. Is it a reminder that America makes the very best military equipment and that we are reliant not just on their military, but on their corporations as well?
Well, that may be so, but I want to make a different point, if I may, in regard to this announcement today on the F-35s. I thought the Prime Minister, a few moments ago in your interview, didn't give proper explanation as to what the difference was in the capabilities compared to what we have at the moment. It's a very simple but important distinction. For the last 25 years, Britain's nuclear deterrent has been strategic nuclear weapons in Trident. These strategic weapons are the ones that can destroy the world if you had a war with the use of strategic nuclear weapons. What's being announced today is something that's existed for many European countries as well as America, and that is the ability to have, in addition to that, what are called tactical nuclear weapons. They're still pretty savage bit of weaponry, but they kill thousands of people, not millions. And the reason why that's become important, we heard recently during the Ukraine conflict how Mr. Putin was occasionally threatening that if Ukraine didn't behave itself, or if the Americans or the Europeans helped Ukraine too much, who knows, Russia might use its tactical, he didn't mention tactical, but it's nuclear weapons. He was talking about tactical, and it's important that he be deterred on that as much as on the more powerful strategic weapons. It's all about deterrence of Russia, not being subject, Europe mustn't be subject to nuclear blackmail when a country can actually threaten to do something knowing that the other country has no means of defending itself in a comparable way.
So, Malcolm, thanks so much for joining us today. Much appreciated. Let's have a look at the live arrival pictures. Again, we're going to continue to monitor those arrivals for you. As we said, President Trump hasn't arrived yet. His chief of staff has. We'll listen live, of course, when President Trump does arrive, and continue to monitor for all of the arrivals. The Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, of course, inside already. Joining me now to discuss this, Greg Swenson, the Republican Overseas Chair, and the writer and broadcaster, Jamie Klingler. Very good morning to you both. Great to have you with us. Greg, I'll come to you first. Do you think that the President's going to be wooed sufficiently by what NATO countries are announcing, which, of course, is a pledge to increase defence spending, but with some sort of minor details attached and, of course, a target that's quite some way away, a decade away?
Yeah, I think Malcolm had some great points there. You know, it's not just America first. President Trump has always wanted NATO to be stronger. He's been saying this for 10 years now. And so the fact that they're finally increasing defense spending is a good thing for NATO. It's a good thing for America. So, you know, what we should have been concerned with in the last 4 years was the defense cuts in the U.S. 3% a year, three years in a row by the Biden administration. That should have been what was really worrying Europe. That's, 9% cut. Cumulatively, that's 4.5% of the NATO budget. So this is good news. America's back and NATO is back.
But do you think, Greg, he will today, in the next 24 hours, be taking this as a victory, saying, well done, NATO, you've done enough now? Or will he still be kind of foot on their throats, you've got to do more?
I think he'll still encourage NATO to increase spending. I mean, you're right, Wilf. It's going to take a decade for all of this to happen. And so so far so good in terms of the last year or so. In terms of the Europeans stepping up, I think it's important again for the future of NATO, and it's great for America too.
Jamie, how does the Democrat side of the aisle see the way in which President Trump has been responsible for NATO boosting defence spending, whether it's been a blunt approach to doing so? What's the view on the Democratic side of the aisle?
I think we can come on here, we can come and talk to you about this, and none of us really know what Trump's going to do. We can give all the commentary in the world, but then we wake up in the morning and something's changed, and he's dropping F-bombs with world leaders that we've never seen from a president before. Last time we were on, Greg had said that he was the peace president. That's now gone away. So there's only so much we can predict because he doesn't take the advice of scholars and experts and people in policy. So we kind of are going on the fact of his moods and what he's deciding that day for breakfast and what he's going to say today.
Let's dwell on this question of whether he's the peace president or not. I mean, this morning, as our reporter in Jerusalem was saying, the quietest day for a couple of weeks in terms of military exchanges between Israel and Iran. Do you think the ceasefire that's been achieved thus far is not to be commended?
I just don't know if it's going to hold because, like I said yesterday, when we were talking about today, I was like, OK, I need a few hours in the morning because I won't know what happened overnight. There's no way to predict, which is so volatile.
Sorry, excuse me.
No.
Excuse me, guys. Greg, your take on what's been achieved in the Middle East?
Yeah, so far so good. I mean, he's accelerated the peace process with what happened last weekend, and so that's shortening the war. You're seeing it already. Nobody knows if the ceasefire will hold, but so far so good. With a couple of missteps yesterday, but the president obviously was frustrated when he was talking to the reporters getting on Marine One yesterday. But I think message was heard, and I think you're seeing that from both Iran and from Israel right now.
Do you think that there's a new mindset, Greg, from President Trump as to his willingness to get involved overseas? Clearly, there's no boots on the ground, but it was a significant operation. Does it suggest he'll do more with Ukraine, Russia, or elsewhere?
I don't know that it'll affect Ukraine, Russia. I know that, and it's not necessarily new. I mean, he did this in his first term. He used military strength tactically and quickly. You know, he terminated General Soleimani. He had 300 Russian mercenaries killed in Syria. He wasn't afraid to use military power. So that's not new. I think, obviously, the scope and scale of this is new, but, you know, well done for him, because I think it's, in many ways, again, shortening the war.
Jamie, coming back to this, I mean, it's early days, no doubt about it. If this ceasefire holds, is that something that would lead you to commend President Trump's actions?
I'm all for a ceasefire, especially with the work I do with women's safety. Women and children in war times are the ones that suffer the most. So I am all about peace. But it's just a question of at what cost and what's going to happen. I would just like to go to bed knowing that we're going to wake up still in a ceasefire rather than a few hours.
Just want to remind our viewers, we're watching the arrivals. This could be the president arriving, because it looks like a fleet of Chevrolet Suburbans, US-made cars, and so we'll continue to watch this. Greg, what do you think his mood's going to be like? I mean, has he still got a spring in his step from that ceasefire, or was the initial kind of breaking of the ceasefire that he then had to kind of attend to something that's changed?
I think the message was heard. I think he was frustrated again. I think he'll be in a great mood today. This was a massive victory for American power and a demonstration of American strength. Message heard by Iran, that's for sure. And so it's great. It was a great display of American power and fantastic execution by those brave sailors and airmen.
Jamie, in terms of his relations with overseas leaders, is your assessment that they've improved a bit over the last month or two, or is there still strains?
I think there's always going to be strains, especially because it's volatile. We don't know what he's going to do. We don't know if he slept on the plane. So it's like managing a toddler at times. But I think that today, I think even a stopped clock is right twice.
It is a tiring journey to go back and forth. I mean, Greg, to be fair to that, he doesn't love coming to these gatherings. He's had one recently, albeit it was closer in Canada. It's something he comes to reluctantly?
Yeah, he's not a big fan of multilateral institutions. He likes the bilateral agreements. He likes, trade deals, for example, like the US-UK one. But I think he'll be in a good mood here because of what happened last weekend and the progress toward peace in the Middle East. So I think I wouldn't call it a victory lap, but I think he'll be in a great place. And the president's provocative. I don't think we could expect something that's unconventional, and that's okay. That's one of the reasons he was elected.
Jamie, whilst we wait for this, because it does look still like it's minutes away, what's your reaction to the other news overnight in the US that Zoran Mamdani has won the Democratic nomination in New York City?
I think it's brilliant when we elect public servants that really want to serve the public. And his speech and watching Joy and watching people that really want to build up the city and make it a city that is a melting pot and is for everyone at every length or at every level of wealth.
And do you think it has implications for, I know we're a long way off, but for who could be the Democratic nominee in 2028 for the presidential race? My point being here that this could be someone younger, more left on the spectrum.
I just think we need to get New York and California into shape, and I think that they need to drive what the middle part of the country does as well, which we haven't done in many years.
Greg, what's your take?
I think it's a disaster for the Democrats, and it would be a disaster for New York if he's elected. I think, actually, Andrew Cuomo can win as an independent. All the Republicans will vote for Cuomo, or most Republicans. So, it's not over till it's over, but I think if he did win, it would be a mass exodus of taxpayers out of New York.
Cuomo, let's have another sexual abuser, another person that has abused women over his career. Let's get more men in power that don't acknowledge women's safety.
It's a debate that clearly divides people. It's interesting to see what does develop. But the big news overnight out of the New York City Democratic Party's primary for the mayoral race. We, of course, here are waiting for who we think will be President Trump coming out next. He is, of course, there in a big US fleet of cars and significant security. The delay suggesting it is indeed him on board. Greg, in terms of the kind of mood, the vibe that we can expect in this, it is a big set of meetings that they all make a couple of minute statement. It's a big gathering. He doesn't like multilateral. He prefers bilateral. Right. So what do you think will be expected? How long will he stay today, and what will be achieved?
Yeah, look, I think this is a a really important moment because of the timing. And the president really doesn't have to say much. I'm not sure if he's going to do a long rehearsed speech or, whether he sticks to the teleprompter or not, I don't know. But I do think the timing is really good. You've seen a lot of support in Europe with elevating defense spending, that very much because of President Trump's arguments over the last 10 years, going back to the meeting with the Germans in 2018. So, you're right. He doesn't like multilateral situations. I think he'd rather have one-on-ones like he did with the Germans. But he has an effect either way.
Let's have a look here at these the motorcade obviously pulling forward. So I think the next car we'll see is the Beast, as it's called, a car that does travel with him on Air Force One and comes out the back of it at times, or is he here in a Suburban? The security cavalcade there moving on ahead of him. Jamie, we're also talking about bilaterals. There's a report today in the Times that suggests the UK is going to move ahead with a full state visit this year as opposed to a stepping stone visit ahead. Is that something that you think warms to all presidents in the US, or much more so to President Trump than to others?
I think he very much cares about Britain and Britain's kissing the ring. So I think he wants the pomp and circumstance, and I wish Jamie Godley was still here to put up another sign.
Well, we shall see what happens about that. He looks like he's reversing now, so I'm not sure quite what's happening at this stage. Greg, it's interesting to see the text that came out overnight that Mark Rutte, the NATO Secretary General, has sent to President Trump, which, to use Jamie's turn of phrase, that the kissing of the ring is something that I guess a lot of world leaders do.
Yeah, partly just because of the position, right? He is the President of the United States, leader of the free world, and arguably the most powerful man in the world. But he's also demonstrated, again, American leadership, American military strength. And, peace through strength is very important to this president. He's very much like Reagan in that way.
It looks like the limousine that President Trump was in reversed down a back entrance there. We'll continue to monitor this. I know Deborah Haynes is waiting for that arrival. Maybe we can bring in Deborah at some point and get her perspective on the anticipation of his arrival. Of course, maybe he's going down a different route. Maybe he's, for security reasons or planned reasons, gone down a different route. Obviously, half of his motorcade, or the bulk of his motorcade, has left, and his car has backed into a different approach. Most of the leaders are now in. Deborah is able to join us as well. She's obviously been waiting for these arrivals. Deborah, it appears that President Trump has entered, but through a different route.
Oh, really? We haven't been told that yet. The word hasn't got round to the press huddle here as we're all waiting to try and speak to him. But we've just had the Polish president come through, and he is a really important member of the alliance as well. Poland is one of the leading defence spenders. They were the ones that have been really pushing for this 5% target. He was pretty clear that he thinks that the 10-year time frame that allies have given themselves to achieve that uplift in defence spending is too long. He would have rather had it at 2030, but he sort of said that's politics. And I asked him, given that NATO allies are trying to rebuild and rearm and sort themselves out, but they've given themselves 10 years, why would Vladimir Putin wait? Surely he would attack, the threat that he'll attack sooner. And the president was very clear. He believes that Russia is exhausted at the moment, given its full-scale war in Ukraine. And so he doesn't believe that Russia would try to attack NATO right now. However, he says there's a very real threat of that happening in the future, and that's why the allies need to rearm.
Deborah, great stuff for now. Of course, no confirmation yet of whether President Trump is in or not, and may well still run that gauntlet in front of where Debs has been waiting all morning. We're going to take a very quick break here. We'll be back with more live coverage awaiting President Trump's official arrival at the NATO summit after a short break.
Over there, to your left. There have been airstrikes every day. Hezbollah are very sensitive about us showing any pictures, and we're being hurried away right now.
It felt akin to riding into some sort of Armageddon.
Many other areas have been hit badly. There are shells coming in every few minutes. Hear that whistle and that crunch? We know that they're coming from the south of the city, where there's a column of Russian armored
I'm Alex Crawford and I'm Sky's special correspondent based in Istanbul.
It's trying to hit us. That's it. It got us then.
There's a lot of action going on, a lot of heat still. We were the first journalists and the only outsiders to reach the site of the attack several weeks after it happened.
We found from the missile.
It's very difficult to see what around here could be conceived of as a legitimate military target. Only about half a mile from the Turkish coast, a boat seriously overcrowded. This is one of the most severe viruses in the world.
Clearly not had very much to eat at all. A lot of them extremely thin and very frail. Look at that sheet of flames, and that has happened within minutes, and now it's coming from both sides, and it's moving this way.
The world's largest falls now down to a trickle in places.
I can't imagine how much plastic is lying at the bottom of this huge lake. Oh!
Getting up close and personal with a rhino.
This is what makes the job so fantastic.
Jubilation in the streets, while some emotional.
This is a political victory for Prime Minister Modi and his Hindu Nationalist Party. I'm Neville Lazarus and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi. Companies like these are helping India in its trajectory to be a serious player in space exploration. Sky News, get the full story first.
Turkey is burying its dead. Whole families died in this collapse. Generations wiped out.
I'm Siobhan Robbins, Sky's Europe correspondent based here in Berlin.
This is just a small sample of the deadly arsenal taken off the streets.
Anyone could say, I'll do that, and then have to go and shoot someone.
Yes.
Sky News, get the full story first.
Welcome back to Sky News Breakfast. So we are still awaiting the arrival of President Trump at the NATO summit. Still also, by the way, awaiting the arrivals of the leaders of Germany, France, Italy, Merz, Macron and Meloni. So we'll continue watching all of these arrivals. With me on set, as you know from before, Greg Swenson, the chair of Republican Overseas, and the writer and broadcaster Jamie Klingler, particularly, of course, waiting on the president's arrival. Greg, one question I have as we await the NATO arrival of President Trump following what's happened in recent days and weeks is the split that we started to see in his movement, the MAGA movement, over whether or not to enter the conflict between Israel and Iran. Was that potentially a very big split, but now tempered by the fact that it was followed quite quickly by a ceasefire which holds as things stand?
Yeah, it's a great point, Wolf. I think it was tempered. And there was that, sort of anti-war MAGA element. And I think that kind of discussion or that argument is very healthy to have that disagreement in the administration. And I think the president did a really great job of kind of running the fine line where this was not a forever war or potentially a forever war, boots on the ground, and not regime change. This was about a tactical strike to eliminate the nuclear capabilities. I think we can all agree that getting rid of the nuclear capabilities of the regime is a good thing. So,
but there's no proof that they actually got rid of them. And a president that doesn't accept truth and doesn't accept facts and denies those reports is quite problematic because we don't know what's happening.
I mean, realistically, Greg, the nuclear capabilities have been put back. The question is for how long? That they haven't been eradicated for good.
Yeah, and I think, there couldn't be 100% eradication. But I think the leak that came out of, as Caroline Levitt described, the low-level loser from the administration, unfortunate, picked up again by opponents of President Trump, for sure. So this is a lot of partisan views being delivered as fact, when in fact we haven't seen the report. New York Times and CNN, not exactly fans of the president, picked it up. So I think we have to look at the variety of news reports. The IAEA and as well as the ISIS, David Albright, have all said this was a major setback for the regime's nuclear capabilities. That's undeniable.
Jamie?
Honestly, the undeniability and calling people losers and that's where I worry the most. Is I want facts. I want to have world experts to agree on where we're at. It feels like we're in a time warp, that we're back to weapons of mass destruction and we're going to go to war over things, and we don't know the truth. We're in the past.
Do you think they were developing enriching uranium for peaceful purposes? I don't think so. And so it's.
But whether or not those were destroyed or not is important.
It's pretty clear that much or most of it was destroyed. If there's some that they hit, again, peaceful purposes, and then yet they're hiding uranium around the country and building their facilities in a mountain. So it's pretty clear that that strike was effective.
Yeah, we of course wait for anything definitive of how long it's been pushed back, and of course I think what everyone's agreed with, it hasn't been totally removed, and we also wait to see if the ceasefire holds. We've got 45 seconds till the end of the hour. Quick final snapshot from you both. What do we expect from President Trump today? Greg first.
Yeah, I would hope there's a standing ovation for President Trump. I don't think he'll get it. It is NATO. I mean, it is Europe after all. But I do think that this is, again, very good timing for the president. And I think the message to Iran and other enemies or adversaries is that if you build, we will destroy it.
Jamie, last word?
I'd really like less pomp and circumstances and more fact and more actual substance rather than just cursing at people and giving propaganda.
Jamie, Greg, always a pleasure. Thank you both for joining us this morning. More from the NATO summit live after this short break.
I'm Stephen Murphy, and I'm Sky's Ireland correspondent based here in Dublin.
The waters of Ireland and Britain should be home to great white sharks.
If there are great white sharks in this area, there's no reason they wouldn't come here to feed. It's basically a buffet on a beach.
This could be not only a record-breaking storm, but potentially the most dangerous storm ever to hit Ireland.
Good morning to you. It's 9 o'clock. The Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, has arrived at the NATO summit in The Hague, insisting the alliance is as relevant as ever. We're awaiting President Trump's arrival. He's expected in the next few moments. Well, it is Wednesday, the 25th of June. Your headlines. World leaders, including Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer, are arriving at The Hague for what's shaping up to be a consequential NATO summit.
Today is about the unity of NATO, showing that strength. We're bigger than we were before, we're stronger than we were before.
Good morning. The Prime Minister has announced that the UK will spend more than £1 billion on a squadron of new jets capable of carrying nuclear warheads. It's the biggest change in the country's nuclear posture since the end of the Cold War. Sir Keir Starmer is with leaders of NATO nations. Donald Trump due to arrive in a moment. Let's bring in now Deborah Haynes, who's been following those live arrivals for us. Deb, who's the most significant latest arrival?
Oh, we just had the German Chancellor, Chancellor Merz. I'm going to have to say I don't speak German, so I couldn't understand what he said. He just came out and spoke in German and then didn't take any questions. We've got another leader's just arrived now, so I will speak a bit quieter. But we are all waiting, of course, for Donald Trump.
Great stuff. I know we're going to get back out with you when you are able to talk. This is, I think, the leader of Luxembourg coming in now. Still waiting for President Macron of France, Giorgia Meloni of Italy, and President Trump, as we mentioned. Professor Michael Clark's here with me, our security and defence expert, to talk about the significance of all of this. Firstly, Michael, what's been announced today by the UK? 12 F-35 A jets. Talk us through what that means.
Yeah, we were due to have up to 138 F-35B jets, the B variation, and we've been getting those because they're the ones for the carrier. And the difference between the A and the B version is the B version has some compromises because it's got to take off from a carrier. It can take off vertically, so there's more weight involved. The engine's bigger. It's less able in performance. Still performs very well. But the A version, which the Air Force has always preferred, doesn't have the problem of taking off from carriers, doesn't have to have that extra weight, so it performs better. And the A version is the one that is certified for carrying nuclear weapons, not the B version. So we were going to have 138 Bs, instead of which we've got, I think it's about 50 or 60 Bs now, or due to have, and the rest of the fleet will now all be As. That is fine for the Navy. They've got enough for the carrier strike group, but the Air Force will be very pleased because they've always wanted the A version. And the idea of getting a squadron that's nuclear capable is a separate issue in a way. So we buy 12 As, they're nuclear capable, allow for more flexibility in Britain's nuclear posture, but we'll be getting more than 12 As. The whole of the order from now on will be the A version because it's a better performer for the defence of the homeland, which is what the National Security Strategy and the Strategic Defence Review were really all about.
Well, I want to talk more about the details. Well, in fact, Deborah's not able to join us, so let's continue to talk about the details. Yeah. Michael, these are made by the US, Lockheed Martin.
Lockheed Martin, yeah. But we're a Tier 1 partner, and so we get 15% of every aircraft sold, but to ourselves as well as to anybody else. So actually, the more F-35s that are sold around the world, the better for British industry. We have a 15% work share, as it happens.
Let's listen to the Prime Minister talking about this and other aspects of the NATO summit from an hour or two ago.
NATO is as relevant and as important today as it's ever been. We live in a very volatile world, and today is about the unity of NATO, showing that strength. We're bigger than we were before, we're stronger than we were before. There's a historic commitment in relation to spending. And for me, as Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, it's important that we play our integral part because the safety and security of our citizens in the UK is my first duty as Prime Minister. I take that extremely seriously. And in relation to our contribution, the increased defence spend, obviously that goes to our security and our safety, but it also is the engine of growth and jobs in the United Kingdom. So this is a very important meeting of the summit. NATO comes together at an important point, stronger and larger and more determined than ever.
But will you be asking him for clarity?
Well, look, I think it's very important that we stand here as allies, and we do stand here as allies, coming together, absolutely committed to the importance of NATO, particularly at this point in a very volatile world.
You have committed to buying 12 new F-35s, which will be nuclear capable, despite the Strategic Defence Review quite recently saying that wasn't their favourite option. Why have you done that?
Well, the Strategic Defence Review said that we should look at options, including the F-35As. We have now taken decisive action in relation to the F-35As. That's the right decision for our country. It's the right decision for NATO. And it really comes to an important point in a volatile world where we do need a stronger, more diverse, resilient security.
And what will they give us that we didn't have before?
Well, they give us a diversity of capability and a capability that we didn't have before, and that is really important.
Prime Minister Starmer there making comments a little while ago. We are expecting to see President Trump in a moment for his arrival. We're going to keep monitoring for that. Professor Michael Clark is still here with me. Professor, I guess the big question is the extent to which Donald Trump is going to say these announcements by European nations of 5% on national security by 2035, that's what I've been trying to achieve, job done, or whether he's still going to be pushing them along and be dissatisfied?
Well, I think he'll say job done in one respect. I wanted you to all agree. And we haven't all agreed because Spain is standing out of this. Pedro Sanchez, the Prime Minister of Spain, obviously thinks he can get some domestic credit because he's in real trouble domestically from standing against the United States at the moment. That's popular in Spain. Foolish thing to do from a NATO perspective. But aside from Spain, everybody else is going to stand up for a 5% declaration. But what the Americans will be saying is, well, show us when. 5% by when? And we're saying, well, 2035, it was going to be 2032, it's gone to 2035. What are you going to spend it on between now and then? And you might need to spend it more quickly, not leave it all until 2030 before you actually put the spending into it. So the Americans, I think quite rightly, the American team, will be pressing the Europeans to say, be specific about this. The declaration's fine, but we want to see the reality of it. And that will be quite embarrassing for many countries, including our own, who we're going to commit to it, but we're committing to it as slowly as we think we can because of the state of our own economy.
Rivals continue at the NATO summit. And moments ago, the Polish leader, of course, a very important one when it comes to NATO and comes to the current conflict on the east of Europe, was taking questions. And Deborah threw a question to him based on NATO's Article 5.
Why would Vladimir Putin wait 10 years for NATO to increase its defence spending? Do you think there's actually a risk that he might attack the alliance much sooner?
You know, I think that Russia is exhausted because of their aggression against Ukraine after this more than 3 years of aggression. Yes, and I don't expect that Russia is ready to attack other country now. But in the future, this is a real risk. So we have to prepare ourselves. We have to increase our defense, our spending on defense, because it's absolutely necessary for our security and for our future.
How much of a problem was this idea from President Trump on his flight over to say there's multiple interpretations of Article 5? He didn't give a alternate interpretation that was contrary, I guess, but just even opening the door to multiple interpretations.
Well, he was saying what most of us have been saying for years in the analytical community, that there's actually a lot of wiggle room in Article 5. Article 5 doesn't say that everyone will go to war if one nation is attacked. It says that if one nation is attacked, we'll all react as if we've all been attacked. But the commitment is that collectively we'll then consider what to do. Now, we might all consider what to do and decide to sit down and have a conference as opposed to go to war. Politically, we've always interpreted Article 5 as an automatic go-to-war clause, but that's because we've chosen to interpret it that way. There's a lot of wiggle room in it. So now I can say that because I'm nobody. But if politicians say it, it gets serious because it's all based on credibility. And the politician you don't want to hear say it is the President of the United States. So it's true, but it'd be much better if he didn't say it. And the fact is, we've always known in the last 20-odd years, as NATO's got bigger and bigger, that Article 5 would be a bit conditional. It'll depend on the context. It'll depend on the circumstances.
We just saw President Macron arrive. We'll take his press conference if he speaks at it and speaks in English. Professor, on the other side of that, the US President has just deployed a huge show of US military might in a foreign land to defend or help an ally attack, however you want to frame it. Which sends a different message to the West's adversaries, whether it's linked to NATO and specifically Article 5 or not.
Yeah, it was very interesting. I mean, there was a lot of nuance in this, which I'm sure he was aware of. That on the one hand, he said, I'm the president for peace. I'm the president who wants to bring peace. But I'm also the president who will use this instrument that I've got. And this instrument is better than anyone else's. So there were the B-2 bombers flying from Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri, 7,000 miles to drop their 14 bombs on the nuclear facilities in Iran, and then 7,000 miles back again. And I can do this. He shows, I can do this, and I've got naval assets all over the Gulf. We can send 30 Tomahawk missiles from one of our submarines, the Ohio-class USS Georgia, probably. Got 150 Tomahawk missiles on board. They fired 30 of them, only a small proportion of the total. So on the one hand, he's saying, yeah, I'm the man for peace, but look what I've got. And the fact that they sent some B-2s to Guam, they said as a distraction technique, well, maybe it was, but it was also to show the Chinese, look what we can do. You know, we can send our B-2s to bomb the Middle East, but we can send them to Guam as well. So they're well within range of the Western Pacific.
Really interesting, that added detail. Well, we're all, of course, watching these arrivals still and waiting for President Trump to arrive, and able to speak to Tom Cheshire, who's live in Jerusalem for us whilst we do that. And Tom, officially the Middle East isn't on the agenda at NATO, but no doubt many leaders near where you are will be eagle-eyed, focused on what the President does and doesn't have to say about the ceasefire.
Yeah, I think they will, because he's had such interventions already. I mean, yesterday when he got off that plane, clearly furious, used some pretty colourful language, and that resulted in Israeli jets carrying out only what they called a symbolic bombing in Iran. Iran might disagree with that, but so far this ceasefire is holding. After Michael Clark, as he said, there was this massive show of force. We haven't had anything since then. We haven't had missile alerts from Iran into Israel, as had been the case over the last few days. Everyone looking at it. But when it comes to that show of force, there are some questions. There's a leaked intelligence report which has been reported on by US media, saying that that strike on Fordo nuclear, the nuclear site, that only set things back by a few months. Now, Donald Trump has reacted furiously to that on social media. He's insisted it was completely destroyed. The Israeli Defense Forces here agreeing with that, saying it's pushed Iran's nuclear program back several years. The truth is, maybe somewhere between all those two. It's probably just going to take a while to figure it out. You can't just do it from satellite imagery. It's going to take a lot more looking at this. But the ceasefire is holding. I think the other thing to that is it is not just about the force, it's also about the diplomacy. And that's what we haven't heard so much on. There hasn't been a formal ceasefire agreement, as we've seen in other conflicts, as Israel signed with Hezbollah in Lebanon last year, which outlined the sort of parameters of this. It's all pretty vague at the moment. Vague in terms of what Iran might get from it too. Donald Trump perhaps floating the idea that China would be able to buy its oil, perhaps sanctions being lifted, although the White House wrapped back on that. So we're waiting for that detail, but the ceasefire still holding for now.
Let's listen in to Viktor Orban, of course, the Hungarian Prime Minister. He's speaking in English.
Mr. Orban, isn't it concerning that our global security depends on one man's ego, Donald Trump's?
I don't think so. The international order is more based on common sense. And the President of the United States is a man of the common sense, as you have seen just recently to manage the conflict between Iran and Israel. So he's the man of common sense, which means that the new wars getting shorter and the old wars are running out of the fuel, which is the consequence of his activity. Sorry.
He's putting the biggest threat to Europe. He's putting the biggest threat to Europe.
Biggest threat to Europe? Losing the competitiveness. That's the real threat, not the the real threat is not security-wise, it's economic and losing our competitiveness on the global trade. That's our problem.
Do you think that Russia will be mentioned?
Donald Trump's leadership towards NATO.
Sorry?
What do you think of Donald Trump's leadership?
Welcome back.
Do you think he deserves as much credit as Mark Rutte gave him in his private text messages yesterday?
Styles are different in many countries.
Prime Minister, do you expect Russia to be mentioned?
Sorry.
Do you expect that Russia will be mentioned as a threat or an adversary in a final statement after this summit?
It's always mentioned like that.
Do you support it?
You know, I think Russia is not strong enough to represent a real threat to us. We are far stronger. Blocking what? No, we don't block it.
Are you happy that President Zelensky is being kept on the sidelines? behind his time and there's no talk of Ukraine membership for NATO?
You know, NATO has no business in Ukraine. Ukraine is not member of NATO, neither Russia. And my job is to keep it as it is. Thank you very much.
Viktor Orban there, the Hungarian PM, making some interesting statements there, including the fact that he felt the biggest threat to NATO, to Europe, was competitiveness on the economic stage as opposed to a threat from the outside. A comment there, Michael, towards the end, saying my job is to keep it as it is. So I think that was NATO membership, so that Ukraine wouldn't be joining. That wasn't a prospect in the short term. Interestingly, a comment about Russia suggesting Russia's not strong enough at the moment to be a threat to NATO.
Yeah, and that's something that most of his fellow leaders wouldn't agree with. I mean, looking here at the difference between sort of southern European leaders and central and northern European leaders, and Hungary has always, under Orban's premiership, has always taken the view that he can do deals with Putin, and that however much Putin may threaten Moldova, which he certainly does, and however much he may threaten the Baltic states, which he certainly does, that Hungary will be able to do a separate deal because Orban regards himself as understanding Putin and that they've got a rather special relationship. And he says, you know, NATO's got no business in Ukraine, which is in one sense true, but NATO nations certainly feel that Ukraine is the front line in their own defence. And that's what Zelensky says endlessly, that, you know, we are holding the front line for you against these Russian ambitions to recreate something close to the old Soviet empire in Europe.
I want to come back whilst we wait for further arrivals and English comments to what Tom was talking about from Jerusalem. And I mean, how impressive, we were talking here yesterday about the ceasefire, and in the course of the show it was established and then questioned and under threat. And as we sit here today, it was a good night overnight.
Yeah.
How impressive is that for Donald Trump? Early days, we were clear in the last 24 hours how fragile the ceasefire is, but how impressive is it if Donald Trump really got Netanyahu to stand down on counterattacks yesterday?
Oh, I think it's undoubtedly true that President Trump is on the verge of quite a triumph here on two fronts, that if the ceasefire holds and if it leads on to some sort of political process, which it might, then he can say, not that he's reordered the Middle East, but that he's actually stopped the slide into even greater chaos and that there's something better might come out of it. And that if he comes to NATO, most sign up to 5%, and there's a greater willingness for the Europeans to do what they should have been doing years and years ago, he can go back to the United States with two great triumphs, and I think he would deserve them. I mean, you know, he's a volatile man, and you never quite know what's going to happen next. He disrupts things, he creates chaos. On the sheer law of averages, some of them turn out quite well, and these may be turning out quite well, even though they're on a knife edge. And we'll see what happens next. It could all crumble, and it could show how little preparation went into them, how little, you know, proper statecraft went into doing what he did. But if he succeeds, then, you know, let's not be churlish about it.
Let's take a quick break now here on Sky News Breakfast. We're going to continue to monitor those arrivals, including, of course, of President Trump. We'll be right back after a short break.
gives you the very best of Sky News wherever you are. Breaking news, videos and analysis.
Evidence of the crisis.
Podcasts, watching us live.
Live here from Washington.
Wherever you get your podcast.
All in one place. And all at just the touch of a screen. The Sky News app. Get the full story first.
Staying connected is vital for business. Sky Business sponsors this report.
It'll be mainly dry this morning with some sunshine, but Wales, the Midlands and East Anglia will be rather dull and locally damp. Northern parts can expect some showers too. It'll be very warm in the humid southeast, nearer average elsewhere. Southern Britain will brighten later and showers in the north will fade, but Northern Ireland and southwestern Britain will see locally heavy and potentially thundery showers moving in. Warm, mainly dry conditions mean pollen counts will be high generally, moderate and low in the cooler, damper north and west.
Sky Business sponsors this report.
Well, welcome back. Some latest pictures of arrivals at the NATO summit in The Hague, where, of course, we'll continue to bring you live coverage throughout the morning. President Trump hasn't been seen on camera yet. He may well be inside and awaiting to walk past the cameras and past the press, so we will continue to monitor that. Michael, do you think he'll be in celebratory mood? Do you think the situation in the Middle East and the announcements from these NATO members of these pledges to increase spending, albeit by 2035, are enough to make him... Oh, I think, in fact, we can see President Trump now. Let's just have a look and listen in to some of these comments, of course, alongside Mark Rutte, the Secretary-General.
See you on the plane.
You're always on the plane?
They travel. They have better seats than I do. Mr. President, what are you telling us, Prime Minister, about your goals for NATO and Article 5 today? We're with them all the way. I mean, if you take a look at the numbers, we're with them, and they're very big things to announce today. I don't know if you've taken the vote or you're going to take the vote, but I've been asking them to go up to 5% for a number of years, and they're going up to 5%, and that's a big, from 2%. And a lot of people didn't even pay the 2%. So I think that's going to be very big news. NATO is going to become very strong with us, and I appreciate doing it. Perhaps you want to talk.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me first, before I go to the spending, I just want to recognize your decisive action on Iran.
Thank you.
You are a man of strength, but you're also a man of peace. And the fact that you are now also successful in getting this ceasefire done between Israel and Iran, I really want to commend you for that.
Thank you very much.
And I think this is important for the whole world. Then on spending, it's absolutely true. I want to state here, without President Trump, this would not have happened. In 3 stages. When you became president in 2016, 2017, you forced Europeans and Canadians to pay more. At this moment, the result of that phase is $1 trillion extra aggregate defense spending by the Canadians and the Europeans. Then came phase 2, when you became president in January last year. Phase 2 is that all the countries not yet on 2% have now committed to the 2%. This is the old goal from Wales in 2014. 7 were not on 2%, some were saying somewhere in the 2030s. Now this year, all of them, including Canada, including Italy, including Belgium, they have all now committed to the 2%. And now comes the big splash. Today, we will decide to go to 5%. We have to keep ourselves safe from our adversaries, but also because it is fair to equalize with the United States. With this 5%, the Europeans and the Canadians will equalize their defense spending with the United States. So this is not about American taxpayers paying more. This is about Europeans, Canadians paying more. And again, this would not have happened. I'm really saying this here, and some people might criticize me, but then when I speak with them, they all say, yes, you're right. This would not have happened if you would not have been elected in 2016 and re-elected last year and back into office in January. So I want to thank you.
Well, thank you very much. It's a great victory for everybody, I think. And we will be equalized very shortly, and that's the way it has to be. It's going to be a lot of money, too, a lot of defense.
Trillions extra.
Yeah, and we have a great relationship, and we've had a great relationship from the beginning. Highly respected man, and
Yeah, we appreciate you being here too, everybody. We really do. We have a tremendous group of people on my left and a tremendous group of people on my right. They might be even better than my people. I don't know. Let's have a fight. Let's figure it out. Anyway, but we appreciate it, and we've had a tremendous relationship, Mark and I, and we've really worked on this subject for a long time. And when Biden was here, it just died. Like everything else died. And now it's you're going to take, I guess, a vote today, right?
Absolutely. Today we will decide unanimously to do this. That's my absolute conviction.
So we can't talk about it until the vote's taken, because sometimes, you know, strange things happen with those. But I think you're going to.
I'm not too worried.
I think you're going to do very well. Everyone's very happy about it. Go ahead. Yes.
Mr. President, how is the Iran-Israel ceasefire going, in your opinion?
I think very good. Israel came back yesterday. I was so proud of them. Because they came back, you know, they went out because they felt there was a violation, and technically they were right, but it just wouldn't have worked out very well. And they brought the planes back. They had gone on to another journey because there was a little bit of a violation, and I said, you got to get them back. And they came back, and it was a great thing, and it's going very well.
Mr. President, what are your sort of response to the foreign minister saying he still wants to enrich nuclear?
Hello, Katie. She's so great, this one. Any question she asks, I'll answer. Well, maybe I better not say that. What was your question?
What is your response to the Iranian foreign minister continuing to say Iran will enrich uranium and pursue nuclear weapons?
Well, I don't know if they've said that, but I'll tell you, the last thing they want to do is enrich anything right now. They want to recover. And we won't let that happen, number one. Militarily, we won't. I think we'll end up having somewhat of a relationship with Iran. I see it. Look, I've had a relationship over the last 4 days. They agreed to the ceasefire. And it was a very equal agreement. They both said, that's enough. They both said it. But no, they won't do that. The last thing they want to do, Katie, is enrich. They're not looking to... They're not... Can you imagine after all that, they're going to say, oh, let's go and do a bomb. You know, there could be a day in the future, and then somebody else taking our place will be saying, don't do it. And maybe they won't do it as well, I don't know. But they're not going to have a bomb, and they're not going to enrich. And we believe all of the stuff is down there. We don't think they had nearly the time, because to get that out is a very difficult thing. It's not like moving a package or taking this carpet up and moving it. It's very difficult. It's very dangerous to do. We believe it's all down there. We had a tremendous victory, a tremendous hit, and because of that, I don't think they would have been down there, because they knew we were coming. When they know we're coming, they're not going to be down in that 30 stories underground. So no, I think it was just a tremendous victory for everybody, including Iran. Look, you know, they've got a country, and they've got oil, and they're very smart people, and they can come back. Israel got hit very hard, especially the last couple of days. Israel was hit really hard. Those ballistic missiles, boy, they took out a lot of buildings. And they've been great. Bibi Netanyahu should be very proud of himself. And they've really been great. But they're not going to be building bombs for a long time.
Mr. President, what's your reaction to the intelligence reports saying that the Iranian nuclear sites were only partially devastated, not entirely?
Yeah, well, they said it was actually, the report said it could have been they don't know. I mean, they did a report. I could have Pete talk to it because his department did the report. They really don't know. I think Israel's going to be telling us very soon, because Bibi is going to have people involved in that whole situation. We hear it was obliteration. It was a virtual obliteration. When you take a look at the ground above, don't forget, the flame is all underground. But everything above, if you look at the before and the after picture, everything above is burned black. The trees, everything. There's one building, but that's a building that sunk substantially into the granite, so that, you know, the fire goes right over it. I believe it was total obliteration. I believe they didn't have a chance to get anything out because we acted fast. If it would have taken 2 weeks, maybe, but it's very hard to remove that kind of material. Very hard and very dangerous for them to remove it. Plus, they knew we were coming, and if they know we're coming, they're not going to be down there. There aren't too many people that are going to be down there. Pete, do you have something to say about that?
Well, Mr. President, when you talk to the people who built the bombs, understand what those bombs can do, and deliver those bombs, they landed precisely where they were supposed to, so it was a flawless mission.
Flawless.
Right down where we knew they needed to enter, and given the 30,000 pounds of explosives and capability of those munitions, it was devastation underneath Fordo. And the amount of munitions, 6 per location, any assessment that tells you it was something otherwise is speculating with other motives. And we know that because when you actually look at the report, by the way, it was a top secret report, it was preliminary, it was low confidence. All right, so this isn't, you make assessments based on what you know. They
and
don't.
it said it could be very devastating, very serious.
Moderate to severe, and we believe far more likely severe and obliterated. So this is a political motive here.
Was there a leak investigation?
Of course, we're doing a leak investigation with the FBI right now because this information is for internal purposes, battle damage assessments, and CNN and others are trying to spin it to make the president look bad when this was an overwhelming success.
We had a tremendous success, and this is the New York Times. I call it the failing New York Times. It's going to hell. And CNN, which, as you know, very few people are watching. And you would think they'd do the opposite. You would think they'd want to say, this was an unbelievable success. And the thing that hurts me is it's really demeaning to the pilots and the people that put that whole thing together, the generals. That was a perfect operation. And when you look at the holes, and this was done from 52,000 feet, there was no moon, there was no light, and those 3 holes are right together. And also, and nobody talks about this, we shot 30 Tomahawks from submarines, in particular one submarine, but that was 400 miles away. Mm-hmm. And every one of those Tomahawks hit within a foot of where they were supposed to hit, took out a lot of buildings that Israel wasn't able to get. We took them out with Tomahawks. We don't even talk about that. This was a devastating attack, and it knocked them for a loop. And, you know, if it didn't, they wouldn't have settled. If they had won, if we didn't take it out, they wouldn't have settled. Somebody mentioned that to me last night. If that thing wasn't devastated, they would have never settled. Marco, do you have something to say?
No, first of all this stuff about the intelligence, this is what a leaker is telling you the intelligence says. That's the game these people play. They read it, and then they go out and characterize it the way they want it characterized, and they're leakers. This is the game they play. So that's number one. Number two, here's a fact. The conversion facility, which you can't do a nuclear weapon without a conversion facility. We can't even find where it is, where it used to be on the map. You can't even find where it used to be because the whole thing is just blackened out. It's gone.
It's wiped out.
It's wiped out. Then we dropped 12 of the strongest bombs on the planet right down the hole in 2 places. Everything underneath that mountain is in bad shape. And I refer you to the statement of the IAEA, Mr. Grossi. You know what he said? He said there was Iran, the way it looked the day before the attack, and what their nuclear program looks like now. 2 very different things. They are way behind where they were just 7 days ago. Now, anything in the world can be rebuilt, but now we know where it is. And if they try to rebuild it, we'll have options there as well. But all this leaker stuff, these leakers are professional stabbers. That's what they are. They go out and they read this stuff, and then they tell you what it says against the law, but they characterize it for you in a way that's absolutely false. There's no way Iran comes to the table if somehow nothing had happened. This was complete and total obliteration. They're in bad shape. They are way behind today compared to where they were just 7 days ago because of what the president did.
Marco, can I just alert you to one other aspect? So the great thing is you took out the nuclear capability of Iran. This was crucial. You did it in a way which is extremely impressive. But the signal sends to the rest of the world that this president, when it comes to it, yes, he is a man of peace, but if necessary, he is willing to use strength, the enormous strength of the American military. So I think that signal to the rest of the world, this is far beyond Iran, is extremely important. So let me also point us to that aspect of what happens.
They went down, Iran went down to the site afterwards. They said it's so devastated, and they settled when they saw what we did to it. And frankly, if we didn't do that, they would have had a lot of ammunition to keep going. They wouldn't have settled. Somebody brought that up, and 2 Iranians went down to see it, and they called back, and they said, this place is gone. So it's just fake news by CNN, which has got no ratings. It's a failed network. Anybody here from CNN, by the way? Because you're a really disgraceful network. MSNBC, I think, is actually worse. But they're all pretty bad. But yours is good, Katie, I'll tell you. You know what Marco reminded me? He did such a nice job there. It was 9 years ago I had to debate this guy. He was not easy. I think he even got better. But when you were into your little thing, I said, this is when I had to debate this guy. You think it's easy to debate him? It's not easy.
How long do you think that the Iranian nuclear program has been put back by these strikes? Years or totally?
I think basically decades, because I don't think they'll ever do it again. I just don't think they're going to do it. I think they're going to take their oil, They're going to have some missiles, and they'll have some defense. I think they've had it. I mean, they just went through hell. I think they've had it. The last thing they want to do is enrich. They've been trying to do it. By the way, it's hard to enrich. And, you know, when you look at a site like that, very, very hard to build. Very, very hard, very expensive. They spent trillions of dollars trying to do this thing, and they didn't come up with it. And we're actually getting along with them very well right now. But had we not succeeded with that hit ended the war. That hit ended the war. I don't want to use an example of Hiroshima. I don't want to use an example of Nagasaki. But that was essentially the same thing. That ended that war. This ended that with the war. If we didn't take that out, they'd be fighting right now.
Mr. President?
Yeah.
If the Iranians do rebuild, would the United States...
If they rebuild?
Would the United States strike again? And I have also a question about Russia.
But I'm not going to have to worry about that. It's gone for years. It's very tough to rebuild because the whole thing is collapsed. In other words, inside, it's all collapsed. Nobody can get in to see it because it's collapsed. You can't go in to see a room that has, 10 million tons of rock in it. And the tunnels are totally collapsed.
But if they rebuild?
Well, they've already looked at the tunnels. This was an unbelievable hit by genius pilots and genius people in the military, and they're not being given credit for it because we have scum that's in this group, and not all of you are. You had some great reporters, but you have scum. CNN is scum. MSDNC is scum. The New York Times is scum. They're bad people. They're sick. And what they've done is they're trying to make this unbelievable victory into something less. Now, even they admit that it was hit very hard, okay? But it wasn't hit hard. It was hit brutally, and it knocked it out. The original word that I use, I guess it got us in trouble because it's a strong word. It was obliteration. And you'll see that. And it's going to come out. Israel is doing a report on it now, I understand. And I was told that they said it was total obliteration. You know, they have guys that go in there after the hit, and they say it was total obliteration. And, I don't want it for me. I want it for the pilots. I want it for the military. They did such a good job. If you were in the Situation Room with me, with the generals and all of the people that did such a good job, and then they get demeaned by these idiots at CNN who can't get ratings, the place is dying. Nobody wants to even waste their time going on their shows. So they form with the New York Times, who's dying also. Without Trump, you wouldn't have a New York Times.
And then just changing gears to your meeting with Zelensky later today, can you give us any preview of what the two of you might be discussing?
No, well, we'll discuss the obvious. We'll discuss his difficulty. He's got a little difficulty. Zelensky, he's a nice guy. I mean, I'm going to meet him today. I don't know. I assume we're going to be discussing Ukraine.
Yes.
I mean, it seems like the most likely
Is there
subject.
any restart talks there or anything that you might do?
Well, we're going to see. I mean, I've spoken to Putin a lot, and he actually was very nice. He volunteered help on, as you know, on Iran. I said, no, I don't need help on Iran. I need help on Russia. Okay? I said, do me a favor. Help us on Russia, not on Iran. But he was very nice. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk. I think progress is being made. I think great progress is being made on Gaza. I think because of this attack that we made, I think we're going to have some very good news. I was talking to Steve Witkoff, who, by the way, is terrific, and who knows more about this subject than anybody, the subject of what we were just talking about. He was on last night with Jesse and with Laura and with Sean. And boy, Susie, he has a great take on it. He just explains it so easily. He's really very knowledgeable. But he did tell me that Gaza is very close.
One follow-up on Iran. Both you and Secretary Rubio and Hegseth mentioned the leaders. But can you clarify, is the intelligence correct or is the intelligence wrong?
Well, the intelligence was very inconclusive. The intelligence says we don't know. It could have been very severe. That's what the intelligence says. So I guess that's correct. But I think we can take the we don't know. It was very severe. It was obliteration. And you'd think that a media outlet would say, isn't that a great thing? I mean, more importantly for the pilots, for the military, you take their guts out. You take their absolute guts out. They had a tremendous attack. It was a complete obliteration. The other team, the other group, Iran, said, let's stop this. And you know what? Israel said it too. Very smart. They fought like hell, and then they said, let's stop. And they're going to build themselves. And I really see it as sticking. I mean, we may do papers on it, Marco. Maybe we're going to do papers. I don't even know if you need them. They're not going to be fighting each other. They've had it. They've had a big fight, like two kids in a schoolyard. You know, they fight like hell. You can't stop them. Let them fight for about 2-3 minutes. Then it's easy to stop them.
And then Daddy has to sometimes use strong language to
You have to use strong language. Every once in a while, you have to use a certain word.
I think we have to join the others.
Yes, we're going to join some other group. Yes, thank you. Katie, one
last question. Do you believe
she's so good. That's the only reason I pay.
Thank you, Mr. President.
She used to be very difficult. Go ahead.
Do you believe that this strike on the Iranian nuclear program will lead to the release of the hostages in Gaza?
I think that it helped a little bit. It showed a lot of power. Yeah, I think it helped. But we're going to get separately, even before this, we were very close to making a deal on Gaza. I think this helped, yes. Okay. Thank you, Katie. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
President Trump there alongside NATO General Secretary Mark Rutte taking questions largely from the US media. But fascinating headlines coming out left, right and centre from that. Delighted to say alongside me is Penny Mordaunt, the former Defence Secretary, along with our Professor Michael Clark, to react to what we heard there. Penny, first of all, I guess it's the President's framing that the ceasefire is holding and that he doesn't expect it to break down, and the extent to which he feels their Iranian nuclear capability has been set back. He expressed a lot of confidence on both there.
Yes, I mean, I'm very pleased that the ceasefire is holding. What's important is what happens next, and it's very clear that Iran cannot be trusted with this kind of technology. So, as well as dealing with the immediate situation, we need to be thinking more long-term. I think if Iran is going to have these kinds of capabilities for its civilian side, it can't be trusted to do it itself. And I certainly know that's something the President's been thinking about.
I mean, putting aside the extent to which things were obliterated or not on Saturday night, it's interesting to hear him talk about the deterrent aspect of this one attack in the Iranian way of thinking. There's lines coming from him saying that the last thing they want to now do is enrich. Either way, we won't let it happen. Do you think that that's true, that this will act, despite there might be much anger amongst the Iranian people? There might be a long-term belief, well, we need to do this at some point. But in the sort of short to medium term, the next couple of years, as President Trump is president, do you think it will act as a deterrent because he's shown that ability to use force once?
Well, certainly, I think it will have helped the situation. And clearly what Israel did before those particular strikes from the US has helped as well. Iran is running out of capabilities, it's running out of options. And as I think the President was right when he said he wouldn't have been able to get Iran into this position and having these discussions with them if that action had not taken place.
Michael, your assessment on those details and his renewed confidence that they'd done serious damage below Fordo, despite this intelligence report leak?
Yeah, I mean, the Defence Intelligence Agency, this is the leaked report, has said, as any Defence Intelligence Agency will say, and you as Defence Secretary, you must have seen these sort of things, it'll give you high, medium or low confidence in what they say, because that's what intelligence is. We have low confidence that this might have happened. We have high confidence that this probably happened. And that, I imagine, is what the report would have said. Undoubtedly, and they made the point, Pete Hegseth made the point, that they got 3 hits very close together in the same place, because that's the way in dropping these bombs from 50-odd thousand feet. You've got to drop them high so they've got tremendous kinetic energy when they hit the ground. To get 3 in the same place means that they're digging down, so that each one was probably timed to go off slightly differently to the other one, so they explode in a way that digs down. Undoubtedly, that's a sort of technological triumph. But these M57 bombs had never been tested before. They've certainly not used operationally before, so nobody's entirely sure. And we can't be entirely sure. The idea that undoubtedly, it would be logical to assume enormous damage was probably caused, but damage beyond repair, we don't know. And the people who will know eventually, or have a better idea, will be Mossad, Israeli intelligence will get a good idea of this, and the IAEA, because they have lots of monitoring units all over Iran, including at Fordo and Natanz and Isfahan, and they will come up from their own monitoring material with a pretty good assessment. But, I mean, that will be a couple of weeks, maybe 3 or 4 weeks ahead. The idea that we know within hours that it was completely obliterated is not technically credible.
Penny, I want to talk about the other sort of big agenda item. We'll come back to the Middle East in a moment, which, of course, is the aspect of voting today to enforce what's already been announced of 5% on national security by 2035. He was warm, he was constructive, he was positive towards NATO, perhaps more so than we've heard in the past. But I also thought it was really interesting, there was a tone of me and you as opposed to us when it came to that vote in NATO. He was saying to Mark Rutte, you're going to take a vote later today. Of course, he will be one of the members voting in it. It's quite revealing that in the way that he thinks of NATO.
Well, look, I've always believed that the president is committed to NATO. He's just giving us a hard time because we've got to do our bit. We've got to spend more on defence. I think they're going to have a successful summit, and I'm very pleased that the new NATO floor of 3.5% on defence spending will be reinforced. But nations then have to actually go and do it. And I'm very concerned that our government has not set out its plans to reach that target. And there's no sign, just had a spending review, that they're going to be anywhere near it. That's seriously concerning. I just remind people, in 2010, when the last Conservative government came in, on Rusi's figures, the black hole in the defence budget and the equipment programme was 71 billion. That's a disaster. Can't let that happen again. Great that we're committing verbally to spend more. We've got to do it.
Of course, in the early years of the Conservative government, as a percentage of GDP, defence spending came down. Michael, what was your...
It rose. We protected the budget. We had to deal with that situation. From 2016, it started to rise in real terms. Whatever the colour of government, I have always made the case we need to be doing more. And I'm raising concerns now because we're at a real moment. If we don't meet NATO's floor, we're going to be in serious trouble in a few years.
It's something we discussed with the Defence Secretary earlier. Michael, what was your take, though, on that tone of how he spoke about NATO and saying, you've got a vote coming up rather than us? Was that surprising to you or not?
Not really. I mean, because the United States is spending 3.2% of its GDP on defence, which is less than it used to in terms of GDP figures, but of course it's 3.2% of a very big GDP. So there's the US spending, was 850 billion on defence, going up towards $1 trillion. NATO members are presently spending about 425 billion in dollar terms this year. If everyone was spending 3.5% now, they won't, but I mean, if they were, that would bring NATO's European expenditure, with Canada as well, up to about 750 billion. So it would be comparable with US spending. But that's how he sees it. He says, look, we're spending twice what you're spending. All we're asking you to do is to spend about twice as much again of what you're spending so that you're near to what we're spending. And it's an us and them view that he takes because he sees NATO defence as a business person in terms of money. He sees it in terms of how much you're putting in and what you're entitled, therefore, to get out for your subscription. That's the way he sees it.
Penny, what did you make about the rhetoric from Mark Rutte? I mean, we've seen different leaders take different approaches when it comes to trade and other areas. Does some talk tough? Does some praise the president? And obviously, Keir Starmer has largely fallen into the second camp. Mark Rutte took it to a new level there. His praise of President Trump was effusive.
He's doing a good job. He's doing a good job. And I think that the critical thing is that, all being well, they're going to get agreement today on that new 3.5% for defence. Clearly, there's a 1.5 for things that support defence and other aspects of security. But that 3.5 is the critical number. What he's then got to do is get people to deliver on it. And I'm afraid we know we've had NATO floors in place before and people haven't reached them. We've got to keep the focus on this. Westminster has a short attention span. There's lots going on all the time. We can't move on from this. We have to ensure that government is planning properly to fund the most important thing this country does properly.
But I'd just go a step further than that. It's not just about the 3.5. Rutte was full of praise for President Trump for having delivered this ceasefire between Israel and Iran, and for having used American military might to get there. We haven't heard that from our government yet. We haven't really heard it from, I don't think, any foreign government. Do you think that will change the tone of the Prime Minister, for example, when he comes back, to say we support what the US did and we praise Donald Trump for the ceasefire? I mean, early days in the ceasefire, it could all unravel. But do you think it's a turning point on how the rest of Europe will address what's happened in the last week in the Middle East?
So there might be reasons why the government is being cautious on that. I don't know. There may be particular threats that it's concerned about that it doesn't want to encourage. Not necessarily that's a good reason for not saying those things. But I think Mark Rutte is right. I think that the President has shown that if you have these capabilities and you use them wisely, you can quite often prevent worse things happening. I mean, Israel is a good example of this. It's a small nation, less than 10 million people. It's got an armed forces of 165,000 strong, 500,000 reserves, almost 500,000 reserves, and it's got these capabilities. It's got political choice. I want our nation to have the same thing. And if you show strength and you have proper deterrent effect, you prevent bad things happening.
Penny, it was interesting to see the questions that came from what was the US press corps there. It was all about Israel and Iran. It was not so much, A, about NATO defence spending as a whole, but B, about Ukraine. There was one question, I think, about Zelensky, and we moved on quite quickly. Is that a sort of worrying revelation in terms of the level of focus that the US has, do you think, between Russia and Ukraine? I mean, Zelensky, by all accounts, only just got it confirmed that he doesn't have a bilateral meeting with President Trump.
Well, look, I think this is a measure of what the press are focused on. It's very understandable, given recent events, very recent events, that they would focus on that. But I think the President is still focused on Ukraine. He's clearly still in discussions with President Putin. The US Senate in particular is very concerned about the situation in Ukraine and is trying to pile on additional pressure to Putin to actually create the conditions for this to come to an end. So I think the US government is perfectly capable of multitasking. Parliament here needs to stay focused on Ukraine. It needs to stay focused on the Israeli hostages, the humanitarian situation in Gaza, and 30 other things that are going on around the world.
Penny, do you think that the use of American military might, albeit thousands of miles away from Russia, will have scared President Putin, or are these very different areas? I
think it shows that when it's right, the President is not afraid to act, despite quite considerable domestic pressure from his core base not to get involved in anything and not to deploy his armed forces. I think that he's done himself a great favour by showing that he is prepared to use military strength when it is needed. And that, I'm sure, will be observed, and all sorts of nations will be reflecting on that.
Michael, your take on that?
Yeah, I think, this action in the Middle East has shown Putin, if he needed reminding, that President Trump can turn on a dime. And when Trump says, I'm getting annoyed with Putin, I'm getting exasperated with his stalling, but he hasn't done anything about it. He hasn't brought any real pressure to bear, and Russia is still the only significant country not under tariffs, the US tariffs. I mean, US tariffs apply to everybody else, but not Russia, despite $350 billion of trade between them.
Got a lot of sanctions, though.
Yeah, and those sanctions were in place, before Trump took office, and he could increase them if he wanted to, and he says he thinks about it, but he doesn't do it. However, Putin should take away from this the idea that Trump really can turn around, he can change his view, and he can act decisively, even impulsively, and I think Putin will... the Russians look very, very carefully at everything that comes out of the White House. Of course they do. And they analyse it to the nth degree, and they'll be looking carefully at all of this.
Penny, do you welcome the decision to buy 12 F-35As, this change of approach on our nuclear tactical ability?
Well, look, I welcome many things that have been in the Defence Review, and this latest announcement is going to give us a new kind of capability. But unless you can show industry you're going to pay for it, it doesn't matter what you announce. There is always, when we have a Labour government, a gulf between the plans and what is in a Defence Review and what then materialises. And I hope that the UK Parliament is going to continue interrogating the government on this, pushing them, because unless you can demonstrate to industry and to our partner nations that you are prepared to fund this, you don't get the savings, you don't get the step change in industry, the investments it needs to make in its sites and its workforce that you're going to need. So it's a disaster unless the Treasury actually come clean and say this is our plan to fund this.
We'll see as and when the spending is met or not. Michael, if it's endorsed as expected today in this vote of NATO members, and in light of that tone from President Trump, which, even if it was focused on Israel and Iran, was warm towards NATO rather than explicitly critical in the past, is this a sea change moment for NATO and European defence?
No, it's not a sea change, but it's a survival moment for the summit. I mean, this is a one agenda item summit. I mean, normally NATO agendas are 10, 12 really important items on arms control and disarmament and China and trade and so on. This is a one agenda summit, which is about spending. It's a very short summit. It's going to be a very short communique, and it's all about getting President Trump into it, keeping him there for long enough, getting him out of it, and everybody thinking it's been a success. That's fine. Very restricted management of expectations, I think, here.
Well, Michael and Penny, thank you both so much for sticking around. We really do appreciate it. The arrivals dragged on a little bit. The press conference did it too, but it was very interesting, particularly to get your analysis afterwards. Professor Michael Clark and the former Defence Secretary Penny Mordaunt. That does it for us here on Sky News Breakfast. We're going to take a quick break. Gareth will be up next with Sky News Today.